Chapter 210. 193. David goes to battle. These warriors were all Highlander giants, good at trekking in deep mountains and dense forests, and with 2 mages leading the way, they avoided the scouts sent by Salem and entered the hinterland of the Plains of Duk. The undeveloped area of the Plains of Duk was large, and many places were still overgrown with trees, and it would be difficult for more than 100 people to find them. Someone leaked the news, but this team actually knew the exact route and time of Joshua and the others' advance. The guards escorted Joshua and the others through the wilderness, and that evening, they had just set up camp, set up their big tents, and put up their gold plates. While they were praying before dinner, a group of Highlander giants suddenly jumped out of the dense forest in a military formation with swords and spears. These men were burly and ferocious, and the weapons in their hands were heavy and sharp. One of them shouted, "Where are the miners of Duk? Come out and come back with me and you can still live." The captain from Salem broke out in a cold sweat. Well-trained Highlander giants had always been terrifying warriors on the battlefield, and the people opposite were obviously not explorers or ordinary bandits of the wilderness. Looking at their standing posture and formation, they were definitely soldiers who had undergone regular training, and the combat power exerted by such a formation was far from what a motley crew could compare to. The enemy was dressed as hunters and had gathered hundreds of people, while this captain only had 12 soldiers under his command, and it was impossible for him to be a match. What was even more terrifying was that there were 2 men with staffs in the other party's team. Mages could exert the greatest power in battle when fighting in a military formation, especially a legion of mages who had been specially trained to cooperate. This captain was a member of the Link tribe and had followed Amon to hunt in the mountains. After so many years of training, he was already a 3rd-level warrior, and he was also quite courageous, but he did not panic excessively. With a sullen face and a slightly trembling voice, he whispered to Joshua, "I will gather the soldiers to charge. You take the opportunity to escape, as many of you can escape through the wilderness to Salem, and be sure to report what happened here to Lord Aesop." Joshua said in a deep voice, "It's not impossible to fight." The captain stamped his foot. "Those are Highlander giants, born with infinite strength. Moreover, they are not a wandering tribe, but a trained army. If they don't escape, they will be annihilated." "Joshua, they have more people. We can't escape in this wasteland." Othniel, the head of the 12 judges, came over and said, "Captain Dirk, gather your team and protect the big tent and the people in it. Leave the soldiers in front to us." Dirk's eyes widened in surprise. "You?" Otni nodded. "Yes, let us take care of it." Goliath was a noble warrior, and it wasn't easy for a Highlander like him to become a noble. He had been living in the kingdom of Assur for 3 generations, and he became a noble because of his grandfather's military exploits. When Goliath came of age, he also joined the giant legion of the Assyrian kingdom and became the personal guard of Felix, the legion commander, and later rose to become the captain of the infantry formation. This time, the giant legion was sent to the south of the Assyrian plateau, and while crossing the desolate and steep mountains, Goliath was full of doubts about His Majesty's orders. Why did he send the kingdom's most elite legion to such a god-forsaken place? The logistics of such a difficult march were very difficult, and if it had been an ordinary person, the non-combat casualty rate would have been more than half on the way across the plateau, and only a kingdom could organize such a migration. It was only when he reached the plains of Duk that he understood what it was all for. This fertile land was so vast and waiting for people to reclaim and occupy it. If it was all annexed, it would be equivalent to 1/3 of the arable land of the Assyrian kingdom, and it would be much more productive than elsewhere. But there was already the city of Salem in front of them, blocking their way forward. Commander Felix led the vanguard troops to build a stronghold at the foot of the mountain, and with the arrival of a steady stream of follow-up troops, the city of Enrol was built. If the city of Enrol was completed in the future, as far as they could control the area, it would not be a problem to accommodate nearly 100,000 people. But the Assyrian kingdom sent its most elite legion over the plateau to come here, and the purpose was certainly not just to establish such a foreign city. The cultivated fields would not be harvested until after autumn, and the first treasure they found after arriving on the plains of Duk was the mine of the Dushians, which had the best fine iron and Parangan mines on the continent, both of which were strategic materials urgently needed by the Assyrian kingdom. The first conflict with the city of Salem occurred during the fight for the mine. At that time, the city of Enrol was not yet stable, and Salem also needed time to develop, so the negotiations were successful for the time being. Now that the city of Enrol was getting bigger and more people were arriving, if all supplies had to be transported through the Assyrian plateau, the logistics had reached its limit, and it was impossible to station more troops. At this time, they had to advance south, and the first thing they had to do was to conquer the city of Salem. Occupying the mine was only the first step to starting the war, and it was also a test of the strength of Salem. In fact, there were many places at the foot of the southern mountains of the Assyrian plateau that produced fine iron, but the Duk mine, which had already been explored and mined, was the richest of them all, and it would save a lot of manpower and would not have to re-explore and re-excavate. More importantly, that place was also the place with the most concentrated production of parangons on the continent, so they had to get it first no matter what. The Duk miners, who were familiar with the distribution of the veins, good at smelting fine iron, and able to collect parangons, were also an asset. They had mastered the skills passed down from generation to generation, and on the other hand, the millennia of bloodline precipitation made this clan better at learning the skills. Even if they taught the Duk mining skills to others, they would always be a little lacking, and only a few people could use them as skillfully as the Duk miners. Felix was guided by the gods to know that the surviving Duk miners were about to reach the city of Salem, and as they were the owners of that mine, they must not fall into the hands of Aesop. It was best to capture the most capable miners and bring them to Enrol, and if that did not work, kill them, so he sent Goliath to be in charge of the operation. Goliath was responsible for directing the craftsmen in Enrol, and life in the mine was of course much harder than in the city, and the daily work was boring and monotonous. He was a warrior eager to kill on the battlefield to establish merit, and although his giant warriors were powerful, they could not work as coolies in the main mine. After receiving the order from the governor of Felix, he was very happy to command the soldiers into the jungle, and the war he had been waiting for had finally arrived. Although the secret march through the jungle was difficult and dangerous, it felt much more exciting than in the mine, and along the way, there were gods secretly pointing out the route they should take and the time to reach where they should be. Sure enough, they stopped the miners of Duk. They were dressed in rags and had just set up camp. They were praying in front of a gorgeous tent. There were only a dozen armored cavalrymen around them, their horses tied to the trees next to them. Goliath felt that he was a man blessed by the gods, and he seemed to have seen the result of this battle, killing all the enemy soldiers, women and children, and bringing the strongest miners back to Enrol. After the victory of the war in the future, he would also be able to obtain a territory in this new rich territory by virtue of his merits, and become a great noble with a famous title. Goliath took his men and formed a formation in front of the call, waiting for the other party to surrender. The dozen or so soldiers mounted their horses, but did not dare to charge into battle, but surrounded the tent in the camp. There were still people praying in the tent. Were they praying to the gods? Goliath was surprised to see the ragged miners stand up again, holding machetes, sledgehammers, clubs, and other miscellaneous weapons, and walk out of the camp in formation. Walking in front were 12 people, all holding branch-shaped iron staffs, which were iron embryos that had not been fully forged, and behind them were more than 30 strong men. Goliath couldn't help but want to laugh. These people were wearing ragged clothes and holding ragged weapons. Were they going out to beat dogs or to beg for food? Were they all crazy, actually wanting to fight my giant warriors? Goliath's team had 2 priests, and he himself was very strong, far stronger than the average advanced warrior, so he thought that he could kill all these people by himself. Of course, he could not kill them all. Most of them had to be taken back as prisoners of war, so Goliath was ready to show his strength and shock these ungrateful miners, so that they would know his power and surrender obediently. With a huge long sword in his hand, he walked to the open ground with a sneer, pointed to the opposite side and said, "You sinners, put down your weapons and come back with me. I promise to treat the useful miners as kindly as possible. If you try to resist, only death awaits you." As he spoke, he waved the heavy long sword in his hand twice in the air, and the terrifying giant sword with a faint light made a shrill sound as it cut through the air. But in the hands of this giant, It was as easy as waving a feather. Othniel, who was opposite Goliath, shouted with an expressionless face, "You're already dead." The Duk miners had experienced too much suffering, and when they were about to reach their hometown, they encountered an enemy again. For the first time, they would have a head-on confrontation, and their anger finally could not be suppressed. There were more than 60 people in total, more than 40 of them were young and strong miners, and their fighting strength was no less than that of the Highland giants, especially the 12 judges who practiced the power of two sides and had all achieved the advanced level, so they were not afraid of this battle at all. They had not shown their strength yet. Goliath, on the other hand, did not know that he was facing 12 advanced mages who had mastered advanced body arts at the same time. In a regular battle formation, no mage would walk in front of a warrior. He was already ready to stride forward, swing his giant sword, and first cut a few people in half, and then use the light of the sword to sweep the rest of the people away. It was estimated that the miners behind him would collapse without a fight. However, at the moment when Goliath swung his sword and Othniel shouted coldly, no one expected a child to suddenly rush out from the miners and shout, "My divine general, show his power." Before his voice died away, he flicked a flat round stone from the leather bag on his shoulder. The child was David Solomon, whom Othniel had left in the big tent. There were also a dozen non-combatants in the Duk tribe, such as the maidservants of Joshua and Moses, and the youngest David. When Othniel led the miners steadily towards the enemy, David suddenly rushed out of the crowd. Othniel hurriedly shouted, "David, come back!" But David had already made his move. Of course, Goliath saw David, and of course, the soldiers dozens of steps behind him also saw him. There was a burst of laughter, and no one took David seriously. David was just a child with a foot-long hunting knife at his waist. He did not even wear leather armor. His weapon was a rubber band with the end wrapped around a stone that could be bounced out. This kind of thing could also kill enemies in combat, but in David's hands, it was like a child's toy. Goliath turned the tip of the knife, wanting to use the thick back of the knife to bounce the stone back with the dexterity of martial arts. He wanted to directly break David's tendons and bones and teach this arrogant child an unforgettable lesson. However, as soon as he turned his wrist and swung the knife, he heard the priest behind him shout, "Captain, be careful." The stone that was bounced out of the rubber band flew in the air, its speed getting slower and slower until it landed. David was more than 20 steps away from Goliath. The stone was about to be hit by Goliath's knife, but suddenly it strangely accelerated. Goliath only felt his vision blur. The flying stone passed through the knife as if it was passing through the air. Of course, the stone could not pass through the knife. This was a spatial acceleration, a typical advanced auxiliary magic. The two priests sensed the magical fluctuations, but it was too late to warn him. The round stone suddenly turned into a bolt of lightning with white light. Goliath ducked and tried to dodge, but he was too tall, and the white light hit his forehead. With a muffled bang, the stone instantly exploded into pieces. A large part of Goliath's forehead caved in, the knife in his hand fell to the ground, and his huge body fell backward with a loud bang. His forehead was so hard that it was not penetrated by the stone with the energy impact, but it was unknown whether he was dead or alive. David's movements were extremely agile. As he bounced the stone, he had already flown forward, jumped onto Goliath's body in one leap, pulled out his hunting knife, and cut off the huge head with a cold light. The giant soldiers cried out in alarm and had already thrown their spears at him. The two mages raised their staffs high, and a flame fell from midair towards the child. The 12 judges were stunned, and immediately raised their iron staffs and rushed over. An icy mist rolled up along with a gust of wind, dispersing the sea of fire in front of David. As if they had discussed it beforehand, the 12 of them threw a stone the size of a goose egg at the same time. The target of the attack was clear, the two priests in the opponent's battle formation. The two priests were also quite unlucky. They had no idea what kind of opponent they were facing. In the battle formations of the continent, they had never seen a mage raise a weapon and launch a melee charge. The 12 judges cast magic at the same time and threw the stones. These stones carried a vibrating buzzing sound and were very powerful. The two priests did not have time to attack and hurriedly turned their staffs, and an earth wall instantly surged in front of them. The warriors on both sides also rushed forward and waved their weapons to block the flying stones. These warriors, disguised as hunters, entered the jungle and did not carry heavy shields. A stone hit the giant warrior's weapon and turned it into powder with a strong shock and tremor, unexpectedly sending the burly giants flying. The first stone smashed the earth wall, and before the priest could cast a spell to repair it, the second stone smashed the earth wall into dust. Then the stone behind passed through the dust and hit the priest who was casting the spell. There was a long scream of pain accompanied by an explosion of blood, and the two priests were killed on the spot. Stone throwing was a game that the miners of Duk played since childhood. The life of a miner was monotonous and there was no entertainment to enjoy. The children would set up a stone stake on the ground and hit it from a distance, competing to see who could hit it more accurately and faster. The one who could knock down the opponent's stone stake first was the winner. The stones they threw could hit extremely accurately and far. And in the hands of the 12 judges who had mastered the power of two sides, this stone-throwing game that they played since childhood had also become a powerful combat skill. At this time, David had already lifted Goliath's hair and stood on the giant's corpse, raising his head high and shouting, "God grant us victory." The 12 judges led the miners and rushed into the battle formation of the giant warriors, causing the other side to panic and immediately collapse. Many soldiers turned around and ran. The opponents they encountered were too terrifying. A child had killed the powerful leader Goliath with a wave of his hand, and before the battle had even begun, 2 of the priests in the team were killed. The miners, who had been vulnerable in their eyes, now seemed to have become the most terrifying monsters in the world. Once the formation was disrupted and morale was lost, the battle could not be fought. The 12 judges rushed to the front, like tigers entering a flock of sheep. Their iron staffs glowed with dazzling light, and with the explosive impact of energy, the giant warriors in front of them fell to the ground one after another. By the time the miners behind rushed up with sledgehammers and machetes, there was no need to fight anymore. More than 30 of the more than 100 giant warriors had fallen, and the rest fled into the dense forest like frightened birds. Othniel shouted, "Divide into 4 teams, each with 3 judges and 8 miners to search. Don't let them go back to inform us. Captain Dirk, you protect the camp." "David, where is David?" In just a short while, David had chased the fleeing giant warriors into the dense forest, and Goliath's head was on the chest of the corpse. Othniel ordered again, "Whoever sees David, tell him to come back quickly. It's getting dark. It's dangerous to go into the dense forest alone to chase after the giants." In today's encounter, they had achieved a great victory, and David had made a great contribution. Even the 12 judges did not know that the young David actually had such great abilities. Moses did not hold a power awakening ceremony for him, so who taught him? Chasing after the fleeing giants in the wilderness, the judges used detection magic to search for movement in all directions. In this place full of trees, they could not run far in a panic in the dark. The miners chased in the mountains all night and found nearly 70 giant warriors, more than 20 of whom were beheaded in resistance, and the remaining 30 or so were taken captive. When they pushed the captives back to the camp, David had not returned. Everyone was a little worried. There were still more than 20 giant warriors who had escaped. Would the child be in danger? Chapter 2:11. 194, Confrontation of Divine Emissaries. It was already dawn, and Joshua was about to send someone to find David when he saw David walking out of the jungle with a giant sword and shouting, "I caught 28 of them, knocked them out and left them lying in the woods. Should we send someone to drag them all back?" His father rushed forward and hugged David. "How could you have caught so many giant warriors?" David looked up and smiled. "The messengers sent by the gods have been guiding me and telling me where the enemies are hiding." The one who guided David was Medanzo. Ammon vaguely heard the prayers of his people in the Garden of Eden and immediately sent Medanzo to check the situation. Shortly after Medanzo set off, Ammon, who was sitting in the belly of the mountain, suddenly frowned again. Link, who was working with Peloponnes to build a magic spatial formation, heard Ammon's voice again. "I'm a little worried about Medanzo, Link. You go to the plains of Duk too." Madanzo was very fast and arrived at the site of the battle between the miners and the giant soldiers before midnight. By this time the battle had stopped, and the 12 judges were leading the elite miners in search of the fleeing giant warriors in the forest at night. David, who had entered the dense forest alone, was also pursuing the enemy with a machete and detection magic. In this situation, the magic of mages could be seen. In the dark night, in the wilderness overgrown with trees, the giant warriors could not find their way at all, and could not run far even if they wanted to, so they could only hide in a corner and wait for dawn. Mages, on the other hand, could use detection magic to detect the surrounding situation, and their movements would not be affected. Madanzo chose David among so many people because the child was very talented. He not only had the blood of the Duk miners in his veins, but he was also very smart and perceptive. At a young age, he had traveled all over the continent and experienced so many hardships, but he had not lost his spirituality and was always full of courage and fighting spirit. In some ways, this child was even stronger than Amon back then. Amon may not have been the best among the Duk teenagers back then, but Crazy Ol had taken a fancy to Amon. At this time, David was not even 16 years old, but he had already achieved the 5th level of the power of 2 sides. This was quite shocking. Of course, one's achievements could not be completely measured by age. This was only the foundation of the beginning, and it did not represent the height one could reach in the end. For example, Nero, the master of scroll-making, became a supreme mage in his early 20s, but he was only a 7th-level mage his whole life. Crazy Ol, a genius like him, eventually failed to break through to the 9th level. Metatro found that David had quietly found 3 giant warriors with his hunting knife. In the dark, he went around to their backs and suddenly knocked them out. He did not even make too much noise. He did not fight with the powerful giants who were waving their weapons. He was very happy to see his disciples' achievements today, so he secretly pointed out which giant warriors were hiding nearby to David. David, who was in the dense forest, suddenly heard Madanzo's voice. Along with the voice, a strange scene was directly reflected in his mind, showing the hiding place of the giant warriors, and even their posture was clearly shown. David worked until dawn and finally subdued the last giant warrior. None of Goliath's men had escaped. Only then did he walk out of the jungle and return to the camp. Madanzo watched David walk among the clansmen and finally breathed a sigh of relief. Standing in the crystal shuttle, he stretched his arms in the rising morning light. He flew through the night and immediately searched the dense forest of the wilderness with detection magic. Then he used message magic to transmit the hiding place of the giant warrior and the clear situation directly to David. He was a little tired after being busy for so long. Before he could even stretch his body inexplicably tightened. The cloud-shaped crystal shuttle instantly turned into a cloud of mist. Countless sharp ice crystals condensed out of thin air and pointed in all directions. The powerful magic power was ready to be unleashed. He put down his arm and slowly turned around on the cloud, only to feel the dazzling light of the sunrise. He narrowed his eyes and saw a man burning in flames. The man's whole body was emitting flames, but Madanzo could not see his face clearly because he was standing between Madanzo and the rising sun, and the light of the flames had also turned into a dazzling flying wing. "Who are you?" The man spoke. Hearing his voice, there was an inexplicable tingling feeling of being burned in his mind. Madanzo sensed the man's powerful aura and slowly pulled out the key of destiny, the tip of the long spear shining with golden brilliance, like morning dew evaporating in the sun. He asked coldly, "I was going to ask you the same question, why are you here?" The man replied, "I am Kibir, the fire god of Anunnaki, the emissary of God Enlil. For you." Madanzo suddenly laughed and even whistled frivolously, curling the corners of his mouth and replied, "Oh, so that's how it is. No wonder those giant warriors happened to intercept the path of the Duk miners in this 1,000 miles of wilderness. It was you who had been secretly guiding them all along." Madanzo had a problem, or rather a characteristic, that the more nervous he was, the more relaxed he would appear on the surface, and the greater the pressure and the more dangerous the situation was, he would instead appear a little sloppy. Facing Kibir, he was not sure he could win, and the aura that the other party released was very powerful. No wonder Goliath was able to lead his team from the Euphrates Valley to the plains of Duk and just happened to find the Duk miners. Felix, the Lord of Enrol, sending such a team was probably also guided by this divine emissary Kibir. Gods who transcend eternal life usually do not do this dirty work themselves, and there are some special agreements between the gods. They generally cannot deal with mortals directly, but can send divine emissaries to complete some tasks. Medanzo had dealt with the divine emissaries of the Ennead, and now this Kibir was using a similar method. He guided an army from the city of Enrol to intercept the Duk miners. If there were no accidents, this would have been a perfect surprise attack, but no one expected the Duk miners to be so strong that they actually took out all of Goliath's troops. Kibir watched Goliath arrive at his destination accurately, and then left. His task was completed, and the rest had nothing to do with him. A high and mighty divine emissary usually does not participate in the fighting of the mortal world, as no one can guarantee that they will not encounter any accidents. It might be fine once, but maybe 8 or 10 times, they will encounter trouble. Even if there is only a 1% chance of injury, no one can say for sure that they will be safe and sound after 100 battles. If they were always personally involved in battles, then most of the divine emissaries would have died over the long years. But today's situation was a bit special, and not long after Kibir left, he suddenly noticed that something had happened to the 2 priests around Goliath. When Kibir rushed back to check, Goliath's army had been wiped out, but he found a suspicious person in the sky, probably another divine emissary, so he could not help but show himself. Hearing Medanzo whistling, Kibir said angrily, "Which god's emissary are you? Knowing that I am here on a mission under the orders of the great god Enrol, you still dare to make trouble." Medanzo shook the golden spear in his hand and said with a smile, "Your Excellency seems to be ignorant. Don't you know that this is the territory of the city of Salem? The city of Salem enshrines Ammonius and Murin, and I am the emissary of Ammonius. The mighty god Enlil actually sent you to do this kind of shady business of killing people and robbing their goods? Your mission is over, and those giant warriors have met their end. I'm afraid they did not expect that the gods were guiding them to their deaths." Kibir shouted coldly, "The reason why Goliath died was because he underestimated his enemy and was incompetent. The gods have their own principles, they will give guidance to the world, but they will not do everything for the world. You have also completed your mission, but you should not have humiliated another divine emissary in front of him. As far as I know, Ammon did not join the Anunnaki divine clan. You and I are not emissaries of the same divine clan, and I can kill you." The golden spear in Medanzo's hand no longer swayed, and he held it firmly with both hands, while the crystal shuttle under his feet turned into a huge white flower. He stood on the flower and said in a deep voice, "Want to fight me? Then come on. I have been on the battlefield, fought with the continent's #1 warrior, Enkidu, and witnessed his fall with my own eyes." Kibir suddenly stretched out his hand and pulled out a dazzling ribbon of light out of thin air, which turned into burning flames with a wave forward. The golden light behind him also turned into countless wings of fire, extending forward and sweeping towards Medanzo. Medanzo only felt that he was surrounded by flames from top to bottom, and his opponent could no longer be seen, as he was surrounded by a blazing aura on all sides. The outer petals of the giant white flower formed by the crystal shuttle unfolded, constantly disappearing and melting in the flames, and then constantly growing and stretching to resist the attack of the wings of fire. The inner layer of petals retracted and wrapped around Medanzo's body, turning into an ice crystal-like armor to isolate the blazing aura. He swung the key of fate forward with all his might. A sharp golden light streaked across, and the sky was divided into a bright and dark gap. Kibir's figure appeared in the gap, his face full of surprise. He didn't expect the weapon in Medanzo's hand to be so powerful. He occupied a favorable position, with his back to the rising sun, exerting the greatest power of the wings of fire. He was confident that Medanzo would not be able to fight back and could only struggle to resist. Unexpectedly, the golden spear could cut through the light and darkness, and did not change the power of Kibir's wings of fire. The flames that were cut on both sides became more intense, but in the middle, there was a cooling cut. Kibir hurriedly bowed, and the wings of fire rolled out behind him, tightened around the white flower. He stretched out his hand and pulled from the side, and the red light of the flames condensed into a huge shield. The golden light pierced the shield, and the diffusing golden brilliance exploded. In an instant, magic power surged, and the two could not see each other clearly. In the camp in the distance, Joshua and others were ordering the captured giant warriors to stand in line with their hands tied behind their backs. Suddenly, there was a burst of golden light in the distant sky, brighter than the sun. Everyone was dazzled for a while. When they squinted and looked up, there was no abnormality in the sky except for a white cloud floating gently. Both Madanzo and Kibir hid their figures, and the people on the ground could not see them, but at the moment of the fierce confrontation, they could not help but reveal their traces. The golden light burst, and Madanzo flew backward on the huge white flower. The key of fate was also waved backward, drawing a path in the flames. He wanted to take the opportunity to escape from the other party's wings of fire. At this moment, the pervading hot breath suddenly disappeared. When he looked up again, it was the rising sun opposite him. Kibir had actually left under the cover of the backlight. Madanzo was a little puzzled. They had only fought for one round just now, but it was obvious that Kibir was stronger. The two sides had tested each other's strength as soon as they fought. Why did he suddenly leave when he clearly had the upper hand? Just as he frowned, he saw a shuttle coming from the horizon, and Link's voice shouted from afar, "Madanzo, are you okay? Who did you fight with just now? I was almost roasted." Metatro wiped the cold sweat off his forehead and shouted while gasping for breath, "What burnt? Didn't you see that I beat him away as soon as I made a move?" Link had already flown close and said with a smile, "Look at the crystal shuttle under your feet, the heat has not dissipated yet. It was not you who beat him away, it was obviously because I came, and he was scared away by me. Who is this person so powerful? If I didn't come, I'm afraid you wouldn't be able to hold on alone." Madanzo retorted, "You never forget to brag, the person who fought with him was me. This person is Enrol's divine emissary, the fire god Kibir of Anunnaki." Link gasped, no longer joking, and asked with his mouth wide open, "Kibir? He and the ash god Nugus are the two great generals under Enrol, and they are not ordinary small fries, and you actually ran into him. If I didn't come, you would have really suffered. How strong is this legendary general?" Madanzo replied with lingering fear, "He is definitely stronger than me. I only noticed it when he took up an advantageous position. At that time, he had already charged the power of his wings of fire, and thought that he could take me down with one blow. But he did not expect that I could still fight back, and if he really wanted to kill me, he would have been seriously injured himself." Link patted him on the shoulder. "No wonder Ammonius was worried and specially asked me to come and pick you up. I almost couldn't see you anymore." Madanzo kicked him lightly. "Can't you say something nice? It was the two of us who scared the fire god away together. Sigh, to tell you the truth, if you hadn't come, I would have been ready to run away, and if I really couldn't escape, I would have fought him to the death. This man's wings of fire are really powerful, and standing with his back to the sun is very cool. I'll think about it later." Link comforted him. "It's good that you're okay. The two of us together may not be able to deal with him. He only left because he found that you were not without the power to fight back and was unwilling to fight head-on. Ammonius sent you to see the situation of the Duk miners. How is it going over there?" Madanzo pointed to the path in the distance. "It was scary but not dangerous. The city of Enrol sent an army of giants to intercept and kill them, and the escorting guards of Salem were no match, but the 12 judges and David took care of them all, and are now preparing to take the captives on their way." Link nodded. "Ammonius is really wise. Let's also follow behind and watch quietly. They will be safe once they reach Salem." Link put away the wind-riding shuttle and jumped onto the crystal shuttle, and Madanzo controlled the white cloud to float in the direction of Salem, but suddenly his figure swayed, and the cloud under his feet almost scattered. Link helped him in time, and the white cloud asked in surprise, "What's wrong with you? Are you hurt?" Madanzo grabbed Link's arm and replied in some horror, "No, I'm not hurt. Maybe I used too much magic in that fight just now. I suddenly feel very weak." "That's not right, I shouldn't be so weak." Link looked at Madanzo and suddenly thought of something, and a look of envy appeared in his eyes. "It turns out that Ammonius called me here not because he knew you would meet Kibir, but because he was worried about your current condition. Madanzo, your test is here, and it's even faster than me. Let me send you back to the Garden of Eden quickly." Madanzo, the leader of Amon's disciples and the master of the Key of Fate, actually ushered in the test of losing his power at this time, which also meant that he was about to break through to the 8th level. Link brought him back to the Garden of Eden, and Amon asked about the situation and specially instructed, "You don't have to worry about anything, just train in the Garden of Eden as usual, and build houses and gardens when you have time. Forget the power you once had, and forget that you have lost it. If you really do this and still do not change, this test will naturally be passed." Madanzo stayed in the Garden of Eden, while Joshua and the others arrived safely in the city of Salem and were stunned to see that a magnificent city had been built on the land of their hometown. When they entered the city, the original site of the town of Duk was still empty, with only a courtyard and a small building that looked very familiar. Aesop told them that it was the former residence built by Ammonius himself, and that Joshua and the others would continue to build their homes here, and everything needed was ready. The city of Salem was also looking forward to the early arrival of the miners from the town of Duk, as there were many things that needed their help. The first and most urgent thing was that the parangons in Aesop's hands were running out. Link had obtained Murin's treasure, so how could Aesop lack parangons? Murin's treasure was filled with special parangons, and Amon also needed special parangons to build the Garden of Eden, and the consumption of ordinary parangons was even greater. For example, a cold spring in the Garden of Eden required an aquatic ore and 20 ordinary parangons. Parangons were not only the currency of the continent, but also the material for making all kinds of magic tools and magical formations. The city of Salem was not yet exaggerated enough to build a defensive formation on the city walls, but Aesop had built 2 fortresses between the city of Salem and the city of Enril, and the construction of the magical formations for the fortresses used up almost all of the ordinary parangons in stock and more than half of the special parangons. These 2 fortresses were also battle fortresses, located on both sides of the road leading from Salem to the northern mountains, and each fortress could garrison nearly 1,000 soldiers. They not only guarded the road to the mines, but also the large farmlands outside the city. If Enlil City wanted to launch an attack on Salem, these 2 nails had to be removed before the siege, otherwise they would be attacked from both sides when they arrived at Salem. These 2 fortresses were the most important projects in Salem in the last 6 months, and the other important project was naturally to open up the trade routes in the charcoal marsh, but that task had already been done by Amon and Saya. Aesop still had a batch of special parangons in his hands, but not many of them, which Amon had left for him, and could not be used easily. They were the wealth reserves of the city, and in the future, they would need to buy strategic supplies through the trade routes. In the past few years, although large tracts of land had been reclaimed and many workshops had been built in the city, Aesop had also spent money like water. Chapter 212. Most of the parangons in Aesop's hands were ore cores instead of mined parangons. There weren't that many people who would specifically extract the parangons from the ore cores. The original tribe of cavemen had also learned the mining skills of Duk, but their mastery and proficiency were far inferior to the miners of Duk. Not only were they inefficient, but they also destroyed a lot of parangons during mining. Aesop simply ordered most of the ore cores to be sealed up and piled up like a small hill, waiting for the Duk miners to arrive. In the eyes of many, the miners of Duk were quite amazing. They could extract parangons from the ore cores with a single blow, even faster than mages. Aesop discussed with Joshua that the miners of Duk should focus on extracting parangons, even ignoring the smelting of iron that they were good at. The city of Taling would send people to build houses for them, as long as the miners made their own requests. Joshua agreed. The second day after they entered Taling, he ordered the miners to start working and extract parangons as quickly as possible. There was another thing that surprised Aesop. His guards were not the only ones accompanying the miners into the city. The miners also brought back more than 60 captives, all of whom were strong and powerful Highlanders. The combat power of these miners was too strong. If it really came to a critical juncture, the 12 judges could still lead the troops on the battlefield. According to the customs of the continent, prisoners of war were reduced to slaves. Half of these slaves belonged to the lords who captured them, and the other half to the kingdoms and cities, just like the distribution of spoils of war. Warriors on the battlefield captured prisoners of war. Slaves were also personal wealth. Kingdoms and city-states had other uses for these slaves, such as exchanging them for their own captives or demanding ransom from the other party. With so many prisoners of war, Aesop's mouth was crooked with joy. Joshua gave him an idea. Instead of dealing with prisoners of war in the traditional way on the continent, he told them that slaves could buy their freedom. As long as they worked for the city of Talling or the lords, they could be paid a portion of the reward. If the reward accumulated to the required ransom, they could be freed. Aesop was taken aback at first, but when he regained his composure, he laughed out loud and patted Joshua's shoulder. "Before you guys came, someone had already recommended you to be the secretary of Tuleng. You're truly a talent. The people of Duk have always been miners. I think they should be merchants. This business is too smart. Not only will it weaken the resistance of the captives, they won't dare to cause trouble or slack off, but it will also make them work harder. On the surface, they will suffer losses, but in reality, they will make a huge profit." How to manage this group of people was also a headache for Aesop, and Joshua quickly formulated the latest laws of the city, incorporating most of these people into the army, and as long as they obeyed the management of the city and made meritorious deeds in the future, they would be given corresponding land. The city of Talling now lacked everything but land. The plains of Duk was full of uncultivated fertile land, and from the 2 battle fortresses in the north to the fortress at the edge of the charcoal marsh in the southwest corner, the area around Talling with a radius of about 200 miles was under their control. A circle could be drawn on the sand table and a piece of land could be taken out, waiting for these explorers to claim it with their merits. Thanks to Pharaoh Lazith II for his generosity. Meng had drawn such a circle on the map of the plains of Duk, and Pharaoh had kept it the same. Reward. Give him his territory. The second major event in Talling was that the battle fortresses on both sides of the road to the north had finally been completed. The magic formations had been set up, and the walls and fortresses had long been built. There were 2 things missing in the first place: a large number of ordinary parangons to be placed in the various positions of the magic formations, and there were not that many soldiers stationed there. After the arrival of the miners from Duk, the missing parangons were mined in a very short time, and the magic formations could finally be operated at any time. These 2 battle fortresses could each house nearly 1,000 soldiers, and there were warehouses stocked with all kinds of supplies, which could be defended for a long time. Each fortress had a magic formation that could protect the fortress when activated, and could launch a counterattack under the control of the mages. This was designed by Amon and linked together, with reference to the magic formations of Montefiore and Babylon City. Although they were only small-scale fortresses, they were still shockingly expensive. 1,500 peasants had officially joined Talling, so the population of the city was now more than 7,000. Excluding the old, the young, the women, the children, and the craftsmen who had to work, about 3,000 soldiers could be organized in times of war. This was almost enough to make every citizen a soldier. Aesop had sent 1,000 soldiers to be stationed in the 2 battle fortresses, 500 soldiers in each fortress. This was the largest regular army he could send out. The rest of the people in Talling could not be completely free from work. Usually, they had to cultivate the wilderness, smelt iron, hunt all kinds of monsters, raise livestock, and process materials. Only when war broke out would they be able to pick up weapons and become soldiers of the city. There were now 1,000 regular soldiers stationed outside the city, and another 2,000 reserve troops in the city. Usually, they would take time to assemble for drills. The size of the reserve troops was barely equivalent to the size of a legion. There was no shortage of leadership talents. The main generals of the Andra Legion of the Empire of Igut were all in Talling. The head of the Andra Legion was Amon, the chief priest was George, the front commander was John, and the captain of the guards was Medanzo. It was also a newly formed miscellaneous army that was trained into an elite division by Ammon. Now, under the leadership of John and George, Talling seemed to have gone through a reincarnation, repeating what had happened in the Andra Legion. The 36 guards that John had brought to the plains of Duk had become the generals of Talling, and were usually responsible for taking turns to drill the formation. On the day that the fortress was built, the Talling Legion was also established. Unlike the legions in other parts of the continent, there was no special position of chief priest in the Talling Legion. The head of the legion directly led the priests to cooperate with the frontline soldiers in battle. Ammon was already a god on the altar and was currently training in the Garden of Eden, so he naturally would not be the head of the legion. Madanzo was also training in the Garden of Eden and could not go to the battlefield for the time being. The head of the legion was the chief priest of the city, George, and the front commander was still John. Although George and John had the experience of forming and training the Andra Legion, they knew in their hearts that the current Talling Legion could not be compared to the Andra Legion of the past. Although the Andra Legion was a newly formed miscellaneous army at the time, it was still a regular legion of the Empire of Igut, with 5,000 official legionnaires, all of whom were at least first-level warriors. The Talling Legion, on the other hand, only had 1,000 regular soldiers and 2,000 reserves, of which nearly 1,000 were not warriors. On the other hand, the total number of the Andra Legion, including the logisticians, reached 20,000 during the war, and there were not that many non-combat logisticians to support the evacuation of Talling, so they had to rely on the trade route to replenish their supplies. George and John had never even commanded such a weak legion in battle, and they were facing the elite giant legion of the Assyrian kingdom. Unlike the high-ranking generals, the people of Talling were full of confidence in victory, largely because of the prestige of Ammonius. Their Ammonius was a supreme general who had shaken the world and was almost invincible. Fortunately, the trade route was opened at the right time, and personnel and supplies were replenished in a timely manner. Sio really gave them face. He organized a large caravan, followed behind the civilian laborers who opened the road, and entered Talling as soon as the road was opened. Aesop personally went to the pass at the edge of the charcoal marsh to welcome the former master and his caravan into Talling, and hosted a banquet in the governor's residence. Sehather was filled with emotion as he looked at the magnificent city of Talon. His former slave was now the lord of the city. It was a place full of miracles. No wonder so many wandering explorers came to the plains of Duk in search of dreams and opportunities. He drank a little too much at the banquet, and finally put his arm around Aesop's shoulder and said, "Aesop, you are now the governor of Talling. Think about me, I've worked so hard for so many years, even risking my life for the title of nobility." Aesop comforted him, "Master Sio, you should also look at others. Among the merchants who did business with you back then, who is richer than you now? You already have the title of deputy director of the city's property department, and your business is doing much better than before. There are very few merchants like you on the continent, so don't worry too much." Governor Aesop actually called him Master Sio again, and the wealthy merchant was so excited that he drank several glasses of wine in a row. "I only said a few words when I saw you, and my heart is usually very calm. Otherwise, how could I have grown so fat? Is it easy to do business to my extent? Have you ever seen a master personally cross the desert to collect debts? It was in the desert that we met Ammonius." Aesop laughed. "Yes, you are indeed doing better than others, and you put in more effort than others, so your business is also bigger. I was really surprised to see you this time. I didn't expect you to come in person with a caravan." Sehather patted the fat on his chest and said, "Isn't that my style? I always look for business opportunities in person, not to mention that God Ammon has summoned me. How can I only send my men here?" Aesop asked again, "Master Sehather, you are indeed very capable. How did you manage to pass the checkpoint with so many armors, weapons, and horses?" Sio replied with some pride, "War horses are easy. Because it was a long journey, each carriage was equipped with a few more horses, and the war horses were mixed in. As for weapons and armors, don't forget that I am also a logistics officer of the Inyaira army, so I naturally have my ways. Lord Dick of Straits and the Inyaira army stationed at the border were also very generous. I paid enough taxes, and they let me through without careful inspection. As for Saya, he was even more cooperative, and even asked me if I needed to buy a batch of supplies nearby. Aesop stood up and raised his cup. Master Sayo, I toast you. You have solved the urgent problem of withdrawing from Lung. To tell you the truth, we are soon going to war with Marduk City in the north, and we are seriously short of logistical and military personnel. That trade route is very important, and we need your continued support. Sayo also stood up and drank the wine in his cup in one gulp. To become a god again, cheers. I also have a hope to open a trading company in Lung, and when this war is won, it will also be a great victory for me. Aesop nodded immediately. No problem, I will sign the document now, designate the best location in the city, and immediately send someone to build your shop and warehouse. You don't have to worry about anything, just do your business. The war was imminent, and in the Garden of Eden, Ammon was still training, and Peloponnes was still building the spatial magic formation. Except for Madanzo, Gabriel, and Moses, everyone else in the Garden of Eden had returned to Lung. Madanzo had temporarily lost his power, Moses could not enter the plains of Duk, and Ammon did not want Gabriel to participate in this war. The two fortresses north of Lung were each garrisoned with 500 soldiers, and the magic formation could be activated at any time, but to exert the full power of the formation, 2 supreme mages were needed to preside over it. Raphael just happened to arrive, and he volunteered to help guard one of the fortresses. Raphael was not a warrior on the battlefield, but it was standard for him to preside over the magic formation in the fortress. Elmar also asked to go with him, staying in the same fortress as Raphael, saying that she could take turns presiding over the magic formation in the middle of a fierce battle, but in fact, she was worried about Raphael's safety. This Ironback king had now transformed into a beautiful girl, and she was also a supreme mage. Aesop originally wanted to send Elmar to another fortress, but Elmar had to be with Raphael, and George and John had to stay in Lung to preside over the situation. There was no way to spare another supreme mage, so he had to look at Link for help. When Link saw this scene, he took the initiative to say with a smile, "Governor Aesop, now that you and George are the commanders, just treat me as a subordinate and send me to guard the other fortress." All the preparations for the war had been arranged, and Aesop sent a letter and something to Felix, the governor of Enrol. The letter told Felix that the people of Duk had arrived in Lung, and that he was invited to come to Lung as a guest to meet them in person. But Felix would never come, because the letter also said that the 100 giant soldiers including Goliath had been wiped out, and there were currently 62 captives. If Felix comes to Lung as a guest, please bring the ransom for the prisoners of war, 20 parangons per person. He also swore in the name of Enrol that he would never invade the city of Lung, and that his giant soldiers could accept employment from Lung and continue to mine iron and parangons in the mines, and Lung would pay half of the reward. The letter was accompanied by a large lacquered wooden box containing Goliath's huge head, which had been treated by magic and medicine and had not yet decayed, and the look of terror on his face at the moment of his death could still be seen. Aesop knew very well that as soon as this letter and wooden box were delivered to Felix, the war would start immediately. Chapter 213. 196. Fortifying the walls and clearing the fields. Felix was so shocked and furious when he received the letter that he kicked the heavy table in front of him out of the hall and smashed it to pieces, then held Goliath's head in his hand and roared at the sky. Felix had long wanted to conquer Salem in one fell swoop, but he was also waiting for the giant legion to assemble. Now he had 3,000 giant soldiers, most of the elites of the giant legion. Under the guidance of the gods, he sent Goliath to intercept and kill the miners of Duk, on the one hand because these miners were very useful, and on the other hand, to test the defensive situation of Salem as well as its strength and reaction. Unexpectedly, the plan completely failed, and none of the 100 giant warriors sent out returned, but Aesop delivered Goliath's head. In his rage, he had to fight even if he did not want to, otherwise how could Felix command the legion and lead the city? He immediately ordered the army to assemble, and 3,000 giant warriors lined up in a formation and rushed to the city of Salem. He had the most elite regular legion of the Assyrian kingdom in his hands, composed of all giant warriors, and officially known as the Adado Legion. Adado was the son of Enlil in the myth, the god of storms in the Anunnaki divine clan, but among the people were still used to calling this army the Giant Legion. Felix did not believe that the motley crew of tribesmen and wanderers in Salem could be his opponent. The only one he used to fear was Ammon, as he heard that the supreme general was very good at fighting. But now that Ammon had become a god on the altar, he would not appear directly on the battlefield. Felix's guess was right. Ammon would not participate in this war in person unless it was absolutely necessary. He was now at a critical juncture, and even the construction of the Garden of Eden was handed over to Peloponnes. His identity had changed, his way of living had also changed, and his mentality of looking at many problems had certainly changed. He was the god believed in by the people of Salem, and as long as his statue still stood in the shrine, it would always give people confidence and hope, but if anything happened to him on the battlefield, it would be a fatal blow to morale. He could still clearly remember the time when Horus manifested his giant eagle avatar above the clouds, but it was destroyed by Enkidu with a single strike of his sword. At that time, that scene had caused such a shock to the morale of Igut's army, and the defense line at Kenmit was almost lost. The city of Salem had invested all its strength into this war, and if it was still no match, Ammon alone would not be able to turn the tide on the battlefield. He knew very well that he was not invincible. Right now, he was a symbol of protection and blessing. For the army, having a firm belief, high morale, and the eruption of combat power when they risked their lives was something that even the soldiers themselves could not imagine. Although Ammon was far away in the Garden of Eden, he could still learn about what was happening on the battlefield through the prayers and sacrifices of the people, but he was training and integrating everything he had learned before into his soul, so he needed to be undisturbed and did not even deliberately look at it. What he did not know was that in the distant Igut, Maria was looking up at the starry sky and silently calling the name of the goddess Isis. For the first time, the adoratress, whose faith was incomparably pure, was distracted during a prayer, and when she called the goddess Isis, the figure of Ammon appeared in her mind. Seth had told Maria that he would come back in 3 months to ask her what decision she had made, and when the war on the plains of Duk broke out, 2 months had passed. Felix led the Giant Legion to the city of Salem. Of course, he knew that the city of Salem had built 2 fortresses 50 miles north of the city, and to attack the city of Salem, these 2 battle fortresses must be removed first. If Salem wanted to set up a battle formation for a decisive battle, the best place was also the open ground between the 2 fortresses. Felix was waiting for the 2 armies to clash there and defeat the main force of the Salem Legion in one fell swoop. However, he did not encounter the army of Salem along the way. The road from Salem to the northern mines was currently the widest in the plains of Duk, and it was along this road that Felix marched. Sitting in the chariot, he could see the 2 fortresses in the distance, standing alone on high ground on both sides of the road, about 3 miles apart, but not a single person could be seen around them, and no soldiers could be seen on the walls of the fortresses. Behind the fortresses were the large fields that Salem had reclaimed in the past 2 years, and the wheat ears in the fields had been urgently harvested, but the straw was still there. The sheep on the distant hillside meadows were also gone, driven back into the city by the shepherds. Surprisingly, the city of Salem did not set up a battle formation here. At this time, the scouts reported that the army of Salem had left the city, numbering about 1,000, and were waiting in battle formation outside the city, and did not come here to meet the enemy. Felix looked at the 2 fortresses and sneered. "I heard that the city was built by cavemen. Do they know how to fight or not? If I had built these 2 fortresses, I would definitely set up a battle formation here, and they would be able to advance and retreat at will." As the head of the Giant Legion, Felix's view was not wrong at all, but the situation in Salem was different. If George had led the NRA Legion back then, even if the individual combat power of the soldiers was not as good as that of the Giant Legion, they would still have formed a battle formation here, relying on the fortresses on the left and right wings to fight. But now many of the people in the Salem Legion had not really been on the battlefield, but many of the people sent by Saya had fought in wars. So George did not want to set up a battle formation at the beginning and fight head-on. If he lost the first battle, The morale of the whole army would fall from its highest point to its lowest point in an instant, and it might even collapse. Felix frowned as he looked at the empty field. The general next to him asked, "What do you think, head of the legion? Should we continue to march forward and fight under the city of Salem?" Felix shook his head. "In that case, we will be attacked from both sides, so let's take these two fortresses first as our forward bases. Don't attack at the same time for the time being, but set up two battle formations on the avenue to prevent counterattacks from the direction of Salem and the other fortress, and take one of the fortresses with all our strength first." The giant legion quickly spread out and set up defensive formations in the direction of the eastern fortress and the city of Salem, and moved all the equipment originally used to attack the city of Salem to the west, preparing to take the other fortress. The strong giant soldiers measured the distance, set up catapults, and lit torches. Groups of soldiers raised shields and carried ladders, and the chariots also set up high platforms with crossbowmen. Strangely, there was no movement in the fortress, like an empty city, quietly waiting for the giant legion to finish all the siege preparations. The general in charge of the siege said to Felix, a little puzzled, "According to the intelligence, there are clearly hundreds of soldiers in this fortress. Why can't I see a single person on the walls? Are they all too scared to show their faces? I have never fought such a battle before." Felix said expressionlessly, "They want to be cowards? Even so, they can't avoid the fate of being breached, so we'll fight as we should." There was no need to besiege the fortress, and Felix was not worried that the soldiers in the fortress would not go to war. He just wanted them to rush out of the fortress to fight, so he only needed to choose one side to attack, and as long as they occupied the walls or opened the gates, it would mean victory. Suddenly, there was a whistling sound on the silent plain, and dozens of huge fireballs flew up and smashed towards the fortress. These were stone balls mined in the mountains with fuel wrapped around them, which were then ignited and thrown out by giant catapults. They could smash down brick walls and ignite houses in the city to cause fires. The catapults built by the Highlanders were particularly large, and the flying stones emitted were heavy and had a long range, making them excellent siege weapons. With no enemy in sight and no battle cries, dozens of flying stones whizzed over with flames. Even the strongest warriors would find it difficult to withstand this blow head-on, and the power of the first wave of attack was chilling. However, when the huge flintstones flew over the walls, the fortress seemed to turn into a mirror-like shadow, the air rippling and the shadows shaking for a while, as if wrapped in transparent waves of water. The flintstones seemed to have shot into invisible water, and the flames extinguished, leaving only faint smoke. Their speed slowed down rapidly, and before they could cross the walls, they fell to the ground. Felix exclaimed in a low voice, "Magic formation! How many mages do they have to be able to set up such a large formation?" Lucian, the chief priest of the giant legion, stared with wide eyes, and it took a long time before he let out a long breath and said, "Lord Felix, that is a formation that covers the entire fortress. It was not set up by the mages temporarily. Similar to the defensive formation of our capital, Nive, it is set up when the city is built and activated during battle, and it needs to be operated by mages. Looking at this scene, there must be a supreme mage presiding over it." Felix exclaimed, "A supreme mage? Could it be that there is a supreme mage in each of these two fortresses? Would they send a supreme mage here, and the city of Salem would not need to be defended?" Lucian replied, "The chief priest of Salem, George, was originally the high priest of the temple of Isis in Igut, who knows what other tricks he has up his sleeves, and what other supreme mages he has recruited to work for him. This magic formation is really not small. Salem is quite rich, and there are experts guiding it. To build such a fortress, the investment of manpower, material, and financial resources is not a small amount." Felix said with a gloomy face, "Salem is indeed a good place. As long as we conquer it, all the gains in the future will belong to us." The catapults were still firing fireballs, and plumes of green smoke rose from the sky on one side of the fortress. The air rippled like transparent water, and cracks appeared on the ground from the impact of the fireballs, then disappeared again, while the fortress remained unmoved, not even a scratch on the skin of the walls. The chariots were lined up on a high platform, and the giants on the high platform had been aiming at the battlements above the walls with giant crossbows, but after aiming for a long time, their eyes were dazzled and their hands were sore, but not a single defending soldier appeared, and the arrows were nocked but could not find a target to shoot. The frown on Felix's face grew deeper and deeper, and he asked the chief priest, "How should we fight this battle?" Lucian mused, "If we don't break this magic formation, it will be very difficult for our long-range attacks to hurt the people in the city. But if the impact on the operation of the formation is too great, it will damage the parangons used to set up the formation, and they will need to replenish it at any time, and after a certain level, it will be difficult to continue, so this is a stupid way to attack by force. On the other hand, the formation must be activated by a mage, and such a formation must be presided over by a supreme mage. A mage cannot use magic power indefinitely, and as long as the other side is tired, the formation will stop, and then it will be our chance to attack the walls." Felix asked again, "Then how long do you think they can hold out?" Lucian thought for a moment and replied, "With this situation, if I were presiding over the formation in the city, I would be able to hold out for half a day at most." Felix, "So long?" Lucian explained again, "This requires the cooperation of the mages and the damaged parangons to be replenished in time. Under the current intensity of the attack, I can hold out for so long. But this is just a useless struggle, they can't kill us, and it's just a matter of time before they die." Felix said with dissatisfaction, "But with such a long consumption, it is not enough to simply use flying stones to blast the city, we also need to launch a strong attack. Lucian, I suggest waiting, there will be casualties when attacking the city, and the fewer the casualties, the better. Order the catapults not to scatter, but to concentrate in one direction, try to penetrate the defense of the formation, and also destroy the opponent's formation parangons." The flying stones suddenly stopped, and then the giant soldiers were seen adjusting the position and direction of the catapults, and when the second attack began, the huge fireballs flew towards a section of the city wall. In another fortress in the distance, Link stood behind a window at the highest point of the fortress, watching from a distance as the giant legion concentrated on attacking the fortress where Raphael and Elmar were stationed, and said with a wry smile, "They really know how to choose a place to attack first. They probably didn't expect that there would be two supreme mages in such a small fortress, right? Well, they really have a way concentrating on one place to bombard the city." Beside him stood a general, originally one of Amon's personal guards, named Vinani, who had now become a general in the Salem Legion. General Vinani asked worriedly, "How long can Lord Raphael and Lord Elmar hold out?" Link, "I don't know about Raphael, but Elmar's stamina is amazing and it won't be a problem for him to hold out for 3 days on his own, and if Raphael takes turns presiding over the formation, he can certainly hold out for more than 7 days. According to George's order, if the giant legion attacks the fortress, do everything you can to hold them off for 7 days. I don't think there will be a problem." Vinani added, "The two lords are naturally fine, but the giant legion will not always attack with firestones. In that case, no matter how many firestones are stored, it won't be enough. I'm afraid that the number of parangons stored in the fortress is limited, and the other mages won't be able to hold out for that long." Link sneered, "If that fool Felix uses up all the firestones and heavy crossbow arrows in order to attack a fortress, then he won't have to attack Salem anymore, and it's best to use all the siege supplies here as well. Salem is not protected by a magic formation. That's Commander George's intention. As for the mages I've trained in the past 2 years, I'm afraid they won't be able to hold out, and it's time to test them." Link had also been training mages in the tribe for the past 2 years, testing trustworthy people and making them swear oaths to Ammonius. It was really difficult to awaken the power of two sides. Although there were 12 judges out of more than 60 miners in the town of Duk, Link had only trained a few dozen mages out of thousands of people. These mages were awakened to the power of magic, but few could master the power of two sides. The dozens of mages in Salem were divided into 2 groups by George, both of which were sent to the 2 fortresses to assist the supreme mages in operating the magic formation to protect the fortress. In the underground hall of the central building of the fortress that was being attacked, Raphael was sitting with a staff in his hand, the parangons on the staff emitting bursts of light, showing the attack on the defensive formation. There were also 10 mages sitting around him, half of whom were cavemen, and they were helping Raphael with the staff in their hands to operate the magic formation. When the giant legion outside the city adjusted their attack and all the flying stones were concentrated in one direction, Raphael heard a faint shattering sound in his ears, and hurriedly ordered the mages resting in the fortress to replace the damaged parangons under the walls to keep the power of the magic formation from weakening. There was a lot of fighting outside the city, but the fortress was still quiet, like a landscape in a mirror, unmoving in the light and shadow. The commander of the siege was a little impatient, and he ran to Felix's carriage and said, "The flying stones we prepared are to blast open the city of Salem. We can't go on like this. Should we order a forceful attack? The soldiers in charge of the catapults are also tired." Felix replied calmly, "Let's continue the attack. The first wave of soldiers retreat to rest. The attack cannot be stopped. They should not be able to hold on any longer. Once the defense of the magic formation weakens, immediately launch a forceful attack. We cannot give the enemy a chance to catch their breath. Inform the crossbowmen to prepare for battle, and shoot down all those who are exposed on the walls." The Highlanders were good at hunting with heavy crossbows, and the giant legion who had been trained in battle formations were naturally more proficient in them. The crossbows of the giant warriors were powerful and had a long range, and they had always been a fearsome weapon on the battlefield, able to hit the enemy outside the range of the crossbows of ordinary warriors. The giant crossbowmen had been standing on the high platform for a long time. In the fortress, Elmar walked into the underground hall. Today, she was wearing a red battle robe on top of the dark golden soft armor, looking particularly bright and eye-catching. She advised Raphael softly, "You must be tired, let me take over." Raphael shook his head lightly. "I can still hold on, half of the mages should rest, let's rotate now." He ordered the mages around him to replace 5 of them. Elmar advised again, "The head of the legion told us not to exhaust our strength at once, even if we can hold on, we should rest at the right time to last longer." Raphael smiled. "I'm not that delicate, I'm stronger than you think. It's just that this magic formation cannot be blindly resisted. It has to be weakened appropriately, otherwise too many parangons will be damaged, and then it will really not be able to hold on." Chapter 214. 197, Siege Battle. Omar had ordered the soldiers stationed in the city to hide in a safe place at the base of the wall, and the horses were led to a corner where the boulders could not hit. Outside the city, Felix showed joy on his face when he saw this scene, and shouted, "They can't hold on any longer, launch a strong attack." 2 rows of giant warriors raised their giant shields to cover the front and the sky, and carried a huge battering ram as they rushed towards the city gate. In other directions, there were also warriors with giant shields and ladders rushing towards the lower part of the city wall. Lucian gathered the mages to set up a magic formation in front of the battle formation. Countless chanting sounds came from the sky, and light fell to impose various protections on the siege soldiers. Wind blades and energy blasts cut holes in the magic formation guarding the fortress. Felix used the mages at the critical moment, letting them form a magic formation to cover the warriors' charge. By now, the mages in the fortress should be tired. Whether it was breaking through the gate or climbing the wall, the combat power of the giant warriors should not be something that the soldiers defending the fortress could resist. The crossbowmen stood on the high platform, and if anyone on the wall poked their head out to counterattack, they would immediately be shot at by the crossbows. This was the most common tactic used by the giant legion when attacking a fortress. Suddenly, many soldiers appeared on the wall of the fortress, wearing helmets and leather armor. The trained soldiers had formed a subconscious habit, and the crossbows shot at the target in an instant. This first round of shots was fast and accurate, and the giant warriors' heavy crossbows were really powerful, and some of the arrows actually hit the wall. Almost all the soldiers on the wall were hit by the arrows, but they did not fall immediately. The arrows in the air were like rain, and some soldiers were hit by several arrows in a row. At this time, the chief priest Lucian shouted, "Look carefully before shooting, those are dummies." Only then did the giant crossbowmen realize that someone had stretched helmets and leather armor out of the battlements with wooden poles, But the giant crossbowmen on the high platform had already shot the first round of arrows, and the heavy crossbows needed to be reloaded. At this moment, soldiers appeared on the wall again, and with loaded crossbows, they fired in unison from the gap in the battlements. Their accuracy was still a bit lacking, and they were far less well-trained than the giant crossbowmen, but this sudden volley of shots still hit quite a few giant warriors, and more than a dozen giant crossbowmen fell from the platform. Battle cries finally rang out, and the attacking soldiers also rushed up, raising their shields and setting up ladders. The giant crossbowmen no longer fired in unison, but instead aimed at the walls above the attacking soldiers and fired alternately, making it impossible for the defenders to stop the giant soldiers from ascending the walls. Suddenly, there was a buzzing sound in the air, and dozens of fire snakes fell, turning into a sea of fire along the long ladder set up by the giant soldiers. This was the counterattack launched by the magic formation. The soldiers of the giant legion also rushed to the gate, and the battering ram hit the gate with a loud bang. The gate did not move, but the entire wall nearby trembled slightly. The magic formation connected the impact of the city gate with the city wall. Either the formation was broken, or the entire tower was destroyed. Hot oil poured down from the tower, ignited in the air, and fell on the shields of the giants, turning it into a sea of fire. Even if the giant warriors attacking the gate were not doused with oil, their shields would be too hot to hold after a while, and they would drop their shields with a strange cry, only to be hit by stones thrown from the city. The giant crossbowmen then fired arrows, and many of the soldiers fighting back on the wall were also hit by arrows, some lying on the battlements with arrows stuck in them, some falling down, and there were casualties on both sides. The giant legion first bombarded the walls with flint stones, consuming the defensive power of the fortress's magic formation, and once the two sides clashed, the battlefield was extremely fierce. The magic formation surrounding the walls suddenly flashed, and the crossbow bolts shot by the giant crossbowmen seemed to be pulled by the viscous air, their range greatly reduced, and they fell to the ground midway. The power of this magic formation suddenly recovered. Felix turned to look at Lucien, his expression clearly blaming the chief priest for his error in judgment. How did the other side's magic formation suddenly recover its power? Didn't they say that it would be difficult to hold on after half a day? Lucien's face was also a little ugly and he whispered, "This is a last-ditch struggle. They can't hold on much longer, we have already attacked the walls." Felix immediately ordered the chariots set up on high platforms to move forward. No matter how good the magic formation was, it would not be able to stop so many crossbows at close range. But as the crossbowmen moved forward, they entered the range of the bows and arrows of the defending soldiers. The arrows and crossbows of both sides shot at each other in the air, and the people on the walls kept throwing down the long ladders with oil and boulders, and the sounds of wailing and shouting mixed together. In the underground hall of the fortress, Elmar had replaced Raphael's position, and the 10 mages who had just assisted in setting up the formation had all been replaced. Raphael was instructing the 6 generals in the city. The first force must hold on and consume their flint and heavy crossbow bolts. These things are not easy to replenish, and once they lose their spirit, the next step will be easy. As long as this attack is repelled, our soldiers will also have real confidence and learn how to fight. The reason why Felix mobilized the siege equipment and concentrated on attacking a fortress was because he received a report from the scouts shortly after he set up the formation that the troops of the Salem Legion that went out of the city stayed outside the city for a while before returning with their banners, and did not dare to rush to the front line to reinforce the fortress, so he attacked with confidence. In Felix's battle plan, by taking this fortress in half a day's time, the other fortress would lose its support, and the defending soldiers would fall into despair as they watched the fortress fall into a state of despair. Then, they would be able to take it down with the momentum. These 2 fortresses would become the forward bases for the attack on Salem, and then the advance would be unstoppable. But the situation was unexpected, and after a fierce attack from morning until dusk, at the cost of nearly 100 casualties, the fortress was still not breached. The magic formation guarding the fortress was still running, and its power was adjusted according to the intensity of the attack, and it could launch a sudden counterattack while defending. When the fire dragons in the air poured down the long ladders of the siege, Lucian also directed the mages in the Giant Legion to activate the magic formation, and streams of ice mist rolled up and blew away the fire dragons. The scene was both tragic and dazzling. Lucian was very shocked. The fortress's defensive formation had been running for most of the day. Was the supreme mage presiding over the formation not tired yet? He had commanded the mages to set up the formation to assist in the siege, and he was already feeling a little tired. At the critical moment, he must not be discouraged, otherwise all his previous efforts would be in vain. Lucian directed the focus of the mages to avoid the most heavily guarded gate, and rays of light fell on the giant warriors who were rushing up the long ladders to the top of the wall. The arrows and stones shot by the defending soldiers were blocked by the giant shields, and the magic formation guarding the fortress was also breached by Lucian's magic, and there were already soldiers about to climb up the wall. The sound of drums conveying orders sounded in the fortress, and armored guards appeared on the wall that was about to be captured. The skilled giant crossbowmen then cooperated with the attacking soldiers to shoot at this section of the wall. Many of the defending soldiers were hit by arrows, and there were already giant warriors brandishing machetes and jumping up the wall. As long as these people gained a foothold on the wall, the giant warriors behind them would continue to rush up. At the critical moment, a strange roar was heard, and a huge long tail flashing with golden light suddenly rolled up from the air and swept down fiercely, knocking over 3 long ladders erected on the wall. The defending soldiers rushed over and surrounded the 5 or 6 giant warriors who had climbed up the wall, taking the opportunity to slash and kill them. The soldiers of the Giant Legion who were watching the battle outside the city were stunned for a moment. There was a terrible monster in the fortress. Could it be that the mage presiding over the magic formation was also proficient in summoning magic? Lucian raised his staff in shock, and the priests around him chanted in unison. The smoke and flames in the air quickly condensed, and a giant snake appeared, emitting thick smoke and flames as it pounced towards the city. No matter what, he must break through the gap and use this giant snake transformed from magic to fight the monster. But after the long tail swept over, there was no sound of the monster. The giant crossbowmen outside the city only felt a blur in front of them, and then they saw a beautiful girl suddenly jump on the battlement. The girl was petite and wore a fiery red battle robe, which was so bright and dazzling on the battlefield that the crossbowmen even forgot to shoot at her for a moment. Although the girl was beautiful, the thing in her hand was terrible. Her slender hand was raised high above her head, holding a stone ball that was half the diameter of her body. It was wrapped in fire hemp that was extinguished after burning halfway. It was the firestone that the giant army had just shot into the city with the catapult. As soon as the girl appeared, she swung the big stone ball and smashed it towards Lucian. With a sharp whistling sound, the stone ball reignited in midair due to the violent friction with the air. If this hit, the supreme mage Lucian would definitely be turned into a flying pile of flesh and blood on the spot. It was too sudden. Lucian was directing the magic formation to assist the warriors in attacking the city, and it was too late to dodge. He hurriedly raised his staff, and the giant snake that had just condensed in the air met the huge stone ball. The giant snake was smashed into pieces, but the flying stone fell into the magic formation. With such a large stone rolling over, it would not be a problem to kill 2 or 3 mages. At this time, there was another loud roar, and a dazzling brilliance flew over, smashing the huge stone ball into pieces. It turned out that Felix, the head of the Giant Legion, suddenly took a step in the air on his chariot and jumped in front of the formation of the mages with his giant sword. Felix himself was also an 8th-level supreme warrior, and due to his talent as a Highlander giant, his strength was amazing. When Elmar saw that Felix had made a move, she shouted from the tower, "Stupid and stupid big man, if you have the guts, come up to the wall and fight me." Lucian hurriedly shouted from behind, "Lord Head, you are the commander of the entire army, you can't go up the wall yourself." He was afraid that Lucian would really rush up the wall, and if the commander was trapped in the fortress and the soldiers could not attack, then the morale of the army would be in chaos. Unexpectedly, not only was there a supreme mage in the city, but the girl was also obviously a supreme warrior. Looking at the flying stone she threw with her bare hands, she could even fight with Felix. No matter how powerful Felix was, he was not an invincible warrior like Enkidu, not to mention that he was the commander of the entire army. Even if he could rush up the wall alone, he could not act so rashly. He waved his giant sword in front of the formation and shouted, "Girl, if you have the guts, come out of the city and fight me." The crossbowmen finally released their arrows, and dozens of heavy crossbow strings sounded, and huge arrows shot towards Elmar with the sound of breaking through the air. Elmar suddenly took out a long-handled mace from behind the wall and swung it in the air, smashing the crossbow arrows into pieces with a gust of wind. The length of this mace was twice as long as her height, and the huge hammerhead was covered with spikes, so the giant warriors on the opposite side were dumbfounded. Elmar shot down the arrows and pointed at Felix with the mace in her hand. "Do you think I'm as stupid as you? Come out of the city and fight you? In your dreams. Aren't you attacking the city? Then come in yourself." After saying that, she turned and jumped off the wall and disappeared. Felix stared at her for a long time with his giant sword in his hand, and just then, another scout sent to the front galloped back to report that the army of Salem had moved out again. At dusk, the fierce attack of the giant legion finally came to an end, and the sounds of fighting subsided. The fortress withstood the first round of attacks, and the defending soldiers also paid the price of nearly 100 casualties. 500 soldiers had such a high casualty rate, and if they had been in formation on an open field, the battle formation would have been broken long ago. Fortunately, they relied on the fortress to defend. Except for some of the civilians sent by Saya, these soldiers had never experienced war before. When the siege battle first started, everyone was very nervous, and when the tension reached a certain point, people either became numb or collapsed. After successfully withstanding the fierce attack of the giant legion, everyone had real confidence instead of unreasonable fanatical confidence. It turned out that they could also fight. In the underground hall in the center of the castle, Raphael was resting. There was a parangon in each of the two castles that could show each other's image, and Raphael was talking to Link in the other castle. Link asked, "What are the casualties?" Raphael replied, "With the support of the magic formation and the fortress, there are still nearly 100 casualties, and the casualties of the defending side are similar to those of the attacking side. The combat effectiveness of the giant legion is indeed strong." Link, Commander George said that the combat effectiveness of the army is fought, and that was the case with the NRA Legion. The giant legion is coming aggressively, and the first wave of attacks is the fiercest. If you can withstand it, you will win. Raphael, this kind of siege consumes too much, and the giant legion can't be consumed indefinitely, but I don't know how many more rounds of such fierce attacks they can launch. Even if the soldiers can hold on, the impact of the magic formation is too great, and the spare parangons I have stored here have been consumed by half today. Link, I have been watching the battlefield. Their consumption of firestones and heavy crossbow arrows is very high, and these things can't be replenished at will in a short period of time. Out of the 50 catapults, 7 were damaged. I didn't expect you to be so difficult to deal with. Having paid such a high price, they should launch a more intense round of attacks, and you have to prepare for another fierce battle. If you can't hold on, I will send reinforcements immediately. Raphael shook his head and said, "In any case, I will hold on to the next round of attacks. George has ordered you not to act rashly in the first 2 rounds of attacks, unless the magic formation is broken, and Elmar will take us to break through to your side. Before breaking through, I need you to activate the formation and send troops out of the city to feign an attack. I think it's time for Salem to act according to plan now." By dusk, the attacks had to stop, and the giant legion should also rest. The soldiers launched 3 waves of attacks in rotation, but they did not take the fortress, and the army that was on guard also stood for a day. It was not suitable for large legions to fight after dark, and the crossbowmen who shot the arrows could not see the target clearly, so the whole army needed to camp, eat and rest, and send scouts to stand guard in all directions. The location of the 2 fortresses was a bit awkward, and it was a bit far for Felix to retreat back to Enrol, so the army had to spend the night on the road. He had planned to retreat 3 miles back to camp, and then organize a strong attack tomorrow. The quartermaster reported the consumption of the day's battle. In addition to nearly 100 casualties, 1/3 of the firestones and heavy crossbow arrows carried by the army had been used up. The catapults threw stones, and in theory, as long as the weight did not exceed the limit, stones of about the same size could be thrown. But well-trained soldiers used stone balls of specific specifications and shapes to hit the target with the longest range and the most accurate hit rate, and the firestones were specially mined and processed. The heavy crossbow arrows, of course, also required specialized craftsmen to make, and there were many processes involved, and they were important strategic materials. It was impossible to carry too many firestones and heavy crossbow arrows in the army, and they were all rationed according to the needs of the battle. The supplies needed to be continuously transported to the front line by the logistics and military supply teams. Felix had originally planned to break through the walls of Salem and occupy the fortresses, but he did not expect that he would not succeed today. Looking at the situation, the firestones and heavy crossbow arrows carried by the Legion would be used up by the time the two fortresses were captured, and he hurriedly ordered the logistics team to urgently transport them from Enrol. While the logisticians were setting up camp, most of the soldiers in the Legion did not rest. After the siege battle formation retreated, the remaining 2,000 soldiers again set up a military formation on the avenue, and there was a murderous aura in the dusk. According to the news reported by the scouts, the Salem Legion had more than 1,000 men in formation outside the city in the morning, but they soon withdrew and returned to the city. In the afternoon, more than 1,000 people came out of the city and lined up towards the two strongholds. Many of the soldiers were holding torches that had not been lit yet. It was obvious that they wanted to take advantage of the night to provide reinforcements. Were they going to fight a night battle? Fighting at night was most feared when men and horses trampled on each other in the chaos, unable to distinguish between friend and foe, so Felix ordered the army to maintain the tightest assault formation and wait for the decisive battle. If they could defeat the main force of the Salem Legion, the two fortresses that were waiting for reinforcements would collapse by themselves sooner or later. Chapter 215. 198. Virtual reality. But they waited and waited until midnight and the moon was in the sky, but there was still no sign of the Salem Legion. Finally, another scout reported that the Salem Legion advanced all the way and lit torches on the way, looking like a fire dragon from a distance, but after 30 miles out of the city, they suddenly turned around and went back. Felix waited for most of the night in vain. The general next to him asked, "Lord Head, they suddenly retreated at night, probably because they sent scouts to find that we were already waiting in formation and did not dare to fight. Should we pursue or not?" Felix glared and shouted, "How do we pursue? Do you want me to form a formation and chase them for 50 miles in the middle of the night? We won't be able to catch up at this distance, and by the time we reach the city, we will have not rested for a day and a night. Go back to camp and rest, and send out guards to stand guard at all times." In the underground hall of the fortress, Raphael was still talking to Link through the communication paragons in the two magic formations, only to hear Link laughing. Felix has been standing in formation for most of the night in the cold wind, and finally can't stand it anymore and wants to go to sleep. It's a bit far, and it's not convenient for them to return to Enrol, so they retreated 3 miles back and set up camp. Raphael smiled bitterly. "This battle is quite wicked. It's not a regular battle. Who made the battle plan? It doesn't seem like Lord George's style." Link laughed and said, "I did this many years ago when I led my people to hunt down those ferocious beasts in the mountains. We can't fight those beasts head-on." Elmar giggled beside Raphael. "I knew it was your idea, not letting people eat and sleep well." Link, "No matter what, the fortress must be defended, otherwise everything is just empty talk. You guys have a good rest, leave the rest of the night to me." The Salem Legion seemed to have expected that Felix would attack the fortress first on the way, and that they would not be able to take it down in a day, so they went out of the city early in the morning and lined up in a battle stance, then retracted their troops and went back to eat. When it was almost sunset, they lined up and went out of the city, assuming the posture of reinforcing the fortress at night, but halfway through, they retracted their troops and went back to sleep, tormenting Felix. The soldiers of the Giant Legion finally rested after a tiring day, and Felix sent out patrols to take turns to keep watch. In the latter half of the night, When everyone was sleeping soundly, the fortress where Link was located in the distance suddenly shone brightly. The magic formation inexplicably activated, and a huge curtain of light shrouded the surroundings. A gate opened, and General Wanani rushed out, leading a group of cavalrymen in bright armor. Hundreds of soldiers also appeared on the city walls, beating war drums and blowing bugles. The chaotic battle cries soared into the sky and were deafening. What rushed out of the castle was a cavalry of 100 men, led by Amon's former personal guard general. They were all armored warriors, and in terms of combat power, they were no less than the giant warriors. Although there were not many of them, they were the elites of the Salem Legion. The giant legion was already on guard, and Felix had ordered them to keep an eye on the fortress. The vigilant giant warriors hurriedly pulled out their weapons and rushed forward to meet the enemy, and in the haste, torches were thrown all over the ground. Such a big movement of course alarmed the sleeping soldiers in the camp, and they picked up their weapons, put on their armor, and got out of their tents. Felix hurriedly assembled a cavalry team and rushed over. When Wanani saw that they had alarmed the large group, they turned their horses away and galloped towards the fortress. The giant warriors in the rear chased outside the castle, and suddenly countless sharp rays of light shot out from the sky. It was the counterattack launched by the magic formation, instantly taking down dozens of enemies who had chased close to them, while the cavalrymen who left the city had fled into the fortress under the cover of the magic formation. Then the light of the magic formation suddenly disappeared, and the surroundings were dark again. Link's tactic was not to rush over to reinforce Raphael, but simply to not let the giant legion sleep well, but to go out of the city to attack was also a big risk, so he sent elite cavalry. The scale of this battle was not large, and the sudden charge killed more than 20 enemies, and Link also lost 8 cavalrymen, and then the gate was closed. Felix's nose was almost crooked with anger. He finally figured out the tactics of the city of Salem, which was to use the powerful magic formation protection of these two fortresses to contain and disturb the giant legion, and let him expend his combat power here. What was consumed was not only the siege supplies, but also the stamina and morale of the soldiers. Although the giant warriors were strong, they were not made of iron after all. They needed rest and the encouragement of victory. They could not help but be restrained and disturbed. The next morning, the generals of the giant legion were discussing the military situation in Felix's tent. Judging from yesterday's battle, the other party's fighting style was very shameless, and they did not want to set up a battle formation to decide the outcome, and their main purpose was to hold, contain, consume, and disturb. But Felix's purpose was to capture and conquer the city of Salem, and the logistical cost of the Assyrian kingdom crossing the plateau was too high, and once a large legion was launched into battle, the battle must be finished quickly. There were two choices in front of Felix. One was to continue to attack the fortress where Raphael was, advance step by step, and win the first victory, nibble away at the enemy's effective forces, and uproot the strategic stronghold of Salem. But the fortress's defensive strength was beyond the giant legion's expectations, and after a day of fierce attacks, they did not manage to take it down. Such a magic formation was built in a small fortress, and not only was there a supreme mage presiding over it, but it could also summon terrifying monsters, and even the girl who jumped out of the walls was a supreme warrior. It seemed unfathomable. If they consumed too much combat power while attacking the fortress, they would not be able to continue attacking Salem in a short period of time, and even give the enemy an opportunity to counterattack. The most difficult thing to judge now was how much more effort would it take to break that fortress? The second option was based on the assumption that the fortress was full of the elites of Salem, and they happened to encounter the strongest fortress, so it might be much easier to attack the other fortress. But what happened in the second half of last night clearly proved that the other fortress was also protected by a magic formation, and it was also presided over by a supreme mage. As for how strong its defensive strength was, it would be impossible to figure out without a fierce attack. Perhaps the other fortress was easier to attack, and if it was successfully occupied, it could also reverse the strategic situation. The third option was to directly attack the city of Salem. If the city of Salem put its most important forces in the two fortresses, then the main city's defenses would be weak. Both Felix and Lucian unanimously judged that Salem could not have the same magic formation as these two fortresses. For a city like that to build a magic formation of that scale, it would take 100 years of operation and countless manpower, material, and financial resources. Only a kingdom could afford the consumption of activating it at full power during a war, and if there were not enough supreme mages and mages to take turns presiding over the formation, it would not be able to operate at all. So it might be easier to move the siege firepower to the city of Salem, take a section of the city wall and rush into the city with all their might, than to attack these two fortresses. The generals discussed all morning about which of the three options to choose, and finally decided to concentrate on attacking the fortress where Raphael was located. The reason was simple: they had already spent a lot of money, and maybe they were just a little bit away from breaking the magic formation in the fortress, and giving up at this time would be equivalent to wasting all their previous efforts. There was a prerequisite for continuing to attack the fortress, and that was not to let that fortress receive reinforcements, so Felix immediately formulated a battle plan. The giant legion consisted of cavalry, chariot soldiers, sword and shield soldiers with spears, crossbowmen, and stone throwers. Their cavalry was not large in number, because the giant warriors were too tall and sturdy for ordinary warhorses to withstand the giant warriors' long-distance galloping. Chariot soldiers were the main branch of their charge, and because Enroll lacked enough warhorses to pull the chariots, the number of chariots was also limited. Stone throwers were a long-range combat force, mainly used to attack walls and fortresses, and could also bombard military formations. Crossbowmen set up high platforms on chariots to shoot arrows was also one of the tactics of siege. As for the majority of sword and shield soldiers, they could be used in various combat situations. Giant warriors could pick up heavy shields and wield long swords to fight, and each was also equipped with a spear that could be thrown from a distance during combat. Felix divided the giant legion into two parts, with more than 1,000 cavalry and sword and shield soldiers forming two battle formations between the two fortresses, on the one hand to prevent anyone from rushing out of the fortress where Link was located, and on the other hand to guard against counterattacks from the direction of Salem. The rest of the crossbowmen, chariot soldiers, stone throwers, and hundreds of elite sword and shield soldiers were concentrated outside the fortress where Raphael was located, intending to take it down in one fell swoop. Felix did not immediately launch a battle, and the battlefield was calm the next day. He arranged for the soldiers to take turns on guard, while most of the rest rested where they were. It had been a day and a night, and many of the soldiers did not even sleep well. Just as the generals were holding a meeting, the scouts reported that the Salem Legion had left the city again, this time with much more movement than yesterday, advancing in formation outside the city, with war drums beating in unison and shouts of killing, as if they were really at war with someone. They also fired thousands of arrows when the chariots charged, then sent people to pick up the arrows that had fallen to the ground, and then reformed the formation, while the chariots behind rushed out again with the sword and shield soldiers, and so on and so forth. Felix froze when he heard the news, then slapped the table and cursed, "Damn it, they're actually practicing military formations at this time. What were you doing earlier? Are you sure that we won't attack the city?" Lucian frowned and said, "For a motley crew, this is the best time to practice formations. Everyone is in danger when a large army is pressing down on the border, unlike doing hard labor during normal times. It's just that the commander-in-chief is really bold. Isn't he afraid of fighting us in a hurry?" Felix scolded. "They have no intention of fighting at all. As long as our army moves, they will definitely withdraw their troops back to the city. They just want to fight a defensive battle relying on the strong city. Yesterday's formation outside the city was just a pretense to disturb us from resting. Today's military formation outside the city is to provoke me to give up the fortress and march forward. I won't fall for this trick. Pass down the order. As long as they don't advance more than 30 miles from the city, we will ignore them. Today, the whole army will rest and reorganize, and tomorrow we will continue to attack that fortress." There was no fighting on this day, and the giant legion waited in place to rest. As Felix expected, the Salem Legion was practicing military formations outside the city, and when they saw that Felix was not fooled, They withdrew their troops back to the city at dusk and did not march forward to reinforce the fortress. In the underground hall of the fortress, Raphael said to Elmar with a gloomy face, "The giant legion has not made any movements all day, just like how you have to hold back your fist before punching. Tomorrow they will definitely launch the fiercest attack. This is a crucial battle, and the casualties will definitely be high, so you will need to take the warriors up the walls tomorrow. Be careful." Elmar also looked a little nervous. "If we really can't hold on, send a signal to Link in advance, and Link and George will attack from 2 directions to cover our breakout." Raphael shook his head and said, "If that's the case, the whole battle plan will be ruined. In any case, we must do our best to defend tomorrow. I have a batch of parangons here. Give it to the mages who are assisting in defending the city, and the formation must be kept intact." He reached out and grabbed out of thin air, pulled out a large leather bag, opened it, and saw that it was full of ordinary parangons. Elmar exclaimed, "You hid so many parangons that you didn't even know about it?" Raphael smiled faintly. "This is not from the city of Salem. Have you forgotten my background? I am also one of the heirs of a prominent noble family in the Hittite kingdom, and this is most of my property. Some of it was given to me by teacher Goliath, who said that it might be useful at a critical moment, and he was right. I have been storing it in the space ring, and this space ring was also given to me by teacher." Elmar took the leather bag and said, "I will make sure that these are your personal wealth, and when the war is won in the future, Aesop will return it to you with interest. There are spare parangons, but I don't know if the mages who help you operate the formation will be able to hold up." Raphael said with his hands behind his back, "War is equally cruel for both sides." Felix used a day to let the attacking soldiers rest, and this day's respite is more important for our mages. Rest well tonight, and prepare for a fierce battle of life and death tomorrow. Elmar looked at him with unconcealable admiration in her eyes, and suddenly grinned. "Felix really attacked the wrong fortress. He didn't know that you were here. People only know that Ammonius is invincible, but they forget that the supreme mage of the Hittite kingdom, Goliath, is a god of war. He is just not as lucky as Ammonius. You are Goliath's proudest disciple, you have followed teacher to many battles, and now you are also the high priest of Saya. It is a waste of talent to let you guard a fortress. With your talent, you can be the commander of a large legion." Raphael shook his head. "Don't praise me like that. I am still far from teacher, and teacher sent me here to receive training. Since it is training, I have to face difficult and dangerous tests, and I volunteered to guard this fortress." On the 3rd day, the most tragic battle on the plains of Duk finally broke out. Felix gathered all the heavy crossbowmen and catapults, and yesterday, urgently transported firestones and a large number of arrows from the city. This kind of head-to-head battle was a test of the will of both sides, and the giant legion began to attack with firestones in the morning, consuming the defensive power of the fortress's magic formation. Raphael did not fully operate the formation to resist, but only extinguished the flames on the stone balls. Countless huge stone balls had crossed the stone wall and smashed into the fortress, and he was trying his best to protect the weak parts of the wall from collapsing from the firestones. Under the whistling firestones that filled the sky, Lucian directed the mages to set up a formation to cover the sword and shield soldiers who drove the long ladders to attack the fortress. The giant crossbowmen also stood on high platforms, pushed forward by chariots, and arrows rained down from the sky, shooting at the defenders on the walls. The magic formation guarding the fortress remained intact after half a day of fierce fighting, but its power had begun to weaken, because the mages who assisted Raphael in operating the formation were tired after repeated shifts. In the afternoon, there were finally giant sword and shield soldiers who rushed up the walls, and the first to bear the brunt was the commander of the giant legion, the 7th-level supreme warrior Jufei. In the fortress were 6 of Amon's former guards, who were now generals leading the troops in Salem, and Elmar led the 6 generals and all the reserves in the city to rush up the walls to fight fiercely. Raphael could only activate the formation to try to prevent more reinforcements from rushing to the walls, while Lucian led the mages of the giant legion to also set up a formation to attack the magic formation and break through the siege. Elmar transformed into the original form of an ironback on the walls, his body covered in hard scales that were difficult for arrows to penetrate, and his sharp claws and long tail were unstoppable. Jufei fought desperately to barely hold off Elmar, and a chaotic battle broke out on the walls, which lasted until near dusk. Since it was a breach in the protective magic formation that was torn open, it was impossible to deploy too many troops, so Felix concentrated all the heavy crossbowmen to cover him, and the sword and shield soldiers took turns to attack, paying the price of more than 200 casualties on a section of the wall that was hundreds of feet long. As for the soldiers defending the fortress, more than 200 were killed, and the rest were wounded, but only lightly or severely. The giant legion's catapults had used up almost all the firestones stored in the camp, including the ones that had just been transported from Enril yesterday, and the arrows of the giant crossbowmen were also running out. In the end, it had become a melee battle where the mages covered the sword and shield soldiers charging into the fortress. Why did Felix pay such a high price? Because in the end he could no longer back down. He always had a thought in his mind that the fortress was about to be taken, and one more wave of attacks would be like the straw that broke the camel's back, but the camel never died. He had been thinking this in the morning and at noon, but as a result he fought until dusk, and there were no more firestones and heavy crossbow arrows to use. Within the walls of the fortress, all the buildings that were not strong had been smashed down, but the walls were still there. Felix also saw his disadvantage, and if he could not break the magic formation to open a gap in the walls, the sword and shield soldiers would have to pay a high price to charge into the fortress. He wanted to reverse this disadvantage, but he never succeeded. In the end, the power of the fortress's magic formation had been reduced to its weakest, and it only connected the front defense of the walls to protect the walls. This offensive and defensive battle ended with Jufei being swept off the walls by Elmar's tail. The commander in the front was seriously injured, and all the giant warriors who rushed up the walls were killed. Chapter 216. The 4 Ironbacks had been Elmar's subordinates for many years, and this time they were also brought to the fortress, but they had not shown up in the previous battles, and they suddenly rushed up the wall at the last moment and played a decisive role. After the battle, Elmar returned to her human form, but her beautiful face had lost all color. She was badly injured, and she was so tired that she was about to cramp. Raphael, who was in the underground hall, was of course unharmed, but his face was also pale, and he could hardly stand up. As for the magicians, they were no longer able to fight. This day's battle did not only happen in this fortress, otherwise, no matter how capable Raphael and Elmar were, they would not be able to stop the all-out attack of the giant legion. Just like yesterday, the cold legion went out of the city to form up again, and the assembled troops slowly advanced in the direction of the battlefield. Felix decided to remain vigilant, but for the time being, he decided to focus on taking down the fortress first. The speed of the retreating legion lung was very slow. They even stopped for lunch at noon and continued to advance in the afternoon. Felix saw that the fortress was about to be taken, and of course, he refused to give up. He knew that he had enough troops to fight on 2 fronts, so he ordered his subordinates to form up to meet the enemy when the Cold Legion had marched 10 miles away, and to ignore them if they did not reach this distance. He did not expect the Cold Legion to be serious this time. When the siege battle was at its most tragic, Felix gathered 1,000 sword and shield soldiers and cavalry to form up on the avenue to meet the enemy. At this moment, it was another fortress that suddenly launched a counterattack. Link opened the gate and rushed towards the giant legion's battle formation with 200 cavalry. In his direction, Felix also placed 500 sword and shield soldiers on guard and immediately formed up to meet the enemy. The cavalry's impact was strong, but it did not completely defeat the battle formation formed by the giant warriors with their heavy shields and long edges. Link also brought 10 magicians out of the city, and with the cavalry, they cast magic attacks. Felix was not moved by Link's attack. He believed that the 500 giant sword and shield soldiers could stop the 200 cavalry and gave the order to fight to the death. Link went out of the city because the situation in the other fortress was critical. He also saw that the enemy's catapults could not be transferred to attack his fortress, and the most feared archers were all not in the battle formation, so he sent the cavalry out of the city to fight. Link himself was also a great magician, and with the help of 10 magicians in his team, he killed hundreds of giant warriors as soon as he left the city, and he also lost dozens of cavalry. But the enemy did not retreat, and the formation was tight. The cavalry could not continue to exert their impact. Link hurriedly ordered the cavalry to return to the city. The cavalry, who had no battlefield experience, was inevitably a little confused when they retreated. The giant warriors took the opportunity to attack and rushed into the gate of the fortress. Just then, there was a sudden buzzing sound. Link, who had already rushed back into the city, immediately activated the defensive formation and launched a counterattack. The city guards also rushed towards the city gates. The city gate was closed, and the giant warriors who had rushed into the city gate were all killed or captured alive after a fierce battle. The priests of the giant legion were attacking Raphael's fortress under the command of Lucian. The archers and catapults were also in that direction, so they could not attack Link's fortress for the time being. The giant warriors outside the city had to retreat and continue to guard. This battle was also thrilling. When the 4 Ironbacks finally joined the battle, George led the Salem Legion and saw from afar the giant army that Felix had set up. On the chariot, John whispered, "Did you see their formation? There are very few cavalrymen, almost all of them are sword and shield soldiers." George muttered, "The giant warriors are very powerful. Be careful of the spears they throw when you charge within 100 steps." John sighed and said, "No matter what, we still have to face them head-on in the end. This is the best opportunity. They have no catapults, no archers, and even no chariots, so we can take our time to get into formation." George nodded slightly and said, "They have few horses to begin with, and there are many places on the Saya Plateau where horses cannot pass, so they have to rely on the strong Highlander giants to carry the horses over. With few horses, there won't be too many chariots, and even fewer cavalrymen, so we have to make good use of them. Their chariots are all set up on high platforms and let the archers attack the fortress. Felix is too confident. Does he want to use sword and shield infantry to resist the charge of our chariots?" John narrowed his eyes and said, "He has the capital to be confident. The spear and shield phalanx formed by the giant warriors is very difficult to deal with. Besides, he has now transferred all the archers to attack the fortress, and they should be tired after shooting arrows for a day. It's all thanks to Raphael and Elmar that we've exhausted their most threatening forces." George's original plan was to let the 2 fortresses hold on for more than 7 days, consuming and restraining the combat power of the giant legion, so that they would not be able to storm Lung in the short term and turn the decisive battle into a war of attrition. Unexpectedly, the plan was not as fast as the changes. He did not expect Felix to use his troops so fiercely, targeting one fortress and launching continuous fierce attacks, while Raphael and Elmar defended the fortress so tenaciously that they had achieved the expected goal ahead of time. If the giant legion were allowed to rest for a few more days to replenish their combat supplies and continue to attack like this, the fortress would definitely not be able to hold. George and John had already prepared for both sides, and seeing this situation, they took advantage of the situation to march forward, and the decisive battle came ahead of time. When the armies of both sides set up in the sunset, the siege battle was finally over. After fighting for a day without taking down the fortress, the crossbows and firestones were exhausted, and the chariots and catapults were also restrained, but another decisive battle was about to begin. At this time, the people who were suffering the most were probably the priests of the giant legion. They had formed a magic formation to assist in the siege and had been fighting fiercely for a day, but now they had to return to the magic formation. It was impossible for the 2 armies to fight without the help of the priests. When the battle formation was set up, Felix was already flustered and exasperated. The head-on battle between the 2 armies that he longed for had arrived when he least expected it. He waved his giant sword and was about to curse when he suddenly heard the rumbling of hooves, and the chariots of the Lung Legion suddenly charged forward. John was slow when he marched, but when he got close, he would fight as soon as he said he would, without a single word of nonsense. The war drums sounded, and George flew into the air. In the center of the Salong formation were 12 priests holding staffs. They were the 12 judges. George had sent all the mages to the 2 fortresses, and the 12 judges were the last priests that could be used in Lung, and they could not only cast magic but also attack in close combat. Each chariot was pulled by 2 horses, and on each chariot was a driver, a sharpshooter with a shield and a sword, and a crossbowman. They rushed to the front of the formation and fired arrows, and on both sides of the chariot formation were armored cavalry to assist in the attack. After the rain of arrows, the giants also threw their spears, and the neighing of horses and screams of pain continued. A general, surrounded by his guards, jumped off the chariot and rushed straight to Felix's position, and the spears shot at him were all swept away by the gust of wind. This man was really a fool, and in the blink of an eye he had already killed his way into Felix's guards, and the guards of both sides immediately fought. Felix shouted and jumped up with his sword in hand. "Who are you?" The general shouted, "John." Then a dazzling white light burst, and the huge energy shock caused the surrounding warriors to fall to the ground. John was already fighting with Felix, and the chariots behind also crashed into the spear and shield formation of the giant warriors, and the battle unfolded in full swing under the dusk. The chief priest of the giant legion, Lucian, secretly complained. The charge launched by the other side's general named John was so powerful that he jumped off the chariot halfway and charged into the formation on foot, dragging the commander Felix into the melee, and the others could not get close at all. The battle had just begun, and the head of the legion himself was no longer able to command the formation, so the responsibility of commanding the battle fell to him, the chief priest, which was unexpected. The Salong Legion seemed to have seen the weakness of the giant legion's misconfiguration and launched a charge with chariots, while the armored cavalry protected the 2 sides of the chariots, which was the most feared tactic of the spear and shield formation. Fortunately, the giant warriors were strong, and the giant shields in their hands were amazingly heavy, so they were able to resist for a while. But the timing of the outbreak of the battle was a bit wrong. It was almost dark, and after a long time, it was bound to fall into a melee with unclear vision, which was very disadvantageous for the infantry in formation, as it was difficult to ensure that the front and rear of the formation could advance and retreat in an orderly manner. Thinking of this, Lucian ordered a countercharge to eliminate the other side's priests at all costs. Because he found that the other side had a supreme mage commanding the whole army, but the number of priests was very small, and only 12 followed the chariots forward in formation. Their position was too close, and the other side's commander seemed to have made a mistake. He should not have placed the priests so close to the front line. There was a vacuum in the middle of the battlefield, which was the place where John and Felix were fighting fiercely, and the 2 generals' personal guards were also repeatedly charging around. Under Lucian's command, the priests worked together to apply various protections to the most elite giant warriors, bypassing this battle, and desperately counterattacked the center of the chariot formation. After this round of fierce assault, the giant warriors threw spears at the 12 judges, and the spears whistled like raindrops. The spears they threw from dozens of paces away could even pierce a wall. However, something surprising happened. The priests actually swung their iron rods, and with a thunderous sound, it was as if a large net of swords had formed, sweeping away the incoming spears, and then they actually rushed over. Sandstorms and flames appeared in front of the 12 judges, and the dust on the ground rolled up and hit the giant warriors' shields with loud bangs, making the giant warriors unable to hold their shields steadily. George waved his staff down in the air, and countless white lights shot down like arrows, defeating the countercharge launched by the giant legion. Lucian was dumbfounded. What kind of priests are they? They are actually charging on the front line. The battle between the 2 armies did not last long, but Lucian had been waiting bitterly, fearing that something would happen to the commander-in-chief Felix. Once the center of the battle formation was broken, the morale of the entire army would be greatly weakened. Felix was very annoyed. He did not expect that the other side would have a supreme warrior who could penetrate his personal guards and directly fight with him, and this person knew magic. A powerful energy impact burst out with the sword rays, and lightning shot out in all directions, entangling him tightly. Most of the Highland giants were born with divine power, but everything had its pros and cons. Most of them were simple-minded and had well-developed limbs. Although they were much stronger than warriors of the same level, it was very difficult for them to train to a higher level. The warriors of the Giant Legion were all Highland giants, the elites of the Assyrian kingdom, but there were only 2 supreme warriors. The front commander, Jufei, had been injured during the siege, which allowed John to succeed in his surprise attack on the commander-in-chief. The priests of the Giant Legion were not Highland giants. Most of the trained Highland giants were warriors, and mages were very rare. So Lucian's command of the army was a little uneasy. Felix wanted to finish the battle with John as soon as possible. He had an 8th level achievement and was stronger than the average 8th level supreme warrior, and his heavy sword carried the power of wind and thunder. Unexpectedly, Hardadef was able to withstand it. His entire body's joints emitted explosive sounds, bringing with it a wave of manic power. He did not retreat in the slightest. It was soon dark, and the casualties of the retreating legion's chariot charge were not small, leaving the wreckage of chariots and horses all over the wilderness. But they broke through the 2 layers of defense of the Giant Legion and repelled a counterattack. Lucian pushed the battle formation at the back to the front, and all the soldiers let out hoarse shouts. Arrows were constantly flying, swords and spears were clashing, and the sound of chariots colliding with giant shields was endless. A loud shout came, and a powerful energy surged out from the center of the battle formation, and 2 figures shot out in a somersault. Felix finally unleashed his most powerful slash, and the giant sword with an arc of light collided with John's sword. The 2 swords were forcibly chipped, and the impact sent both of them flying backward, and the commander finally escaped from the melee. Seeing this scene, Lucian hurriedly gave the order to blow the horn, and the last row of guns and shields left a gap to advance forward. The tired soldiers in front of him fought and retreated like the tide. He wanted to stabilize his position and end this chaotic battle before nightfall. At the same time, the horns sounded from the retreating legion, and the chariots no longer charged, and the battle ended with the fall of nightfall. The result of the battle was a draw. Although the retreating legion had the upper hand in terms of tactical arrangements, the Giant Legion was still evenly matched with their powerful combat power. Both sides suffered more than 300 casualties, and coupled with the casualties and consumption from storming the fortress, the Giant Legion was no longer able to attack in one go and had to retreat to rest. George was also unable to take advantage of the situation to launch a counterattack against the city of Enrol, but he pushed the battle line between the 2 fortresses and reinforced the fortress that had been defended for 3 days. Judging from the situation on the battlefield, it was hard to tell who would win, but this result was a victory for the city of Salem. Although the battle did not defeat the Giant Legion, it reversed the situation of the entire battle, forming a stalemate, holding the front line of defense and ensuring the stability of the rear. And after the baptism of this battle, the soldiers of the retreating legion also gained real confidence and became a force that could fight tough battles on the battlefield. The most tragic part of the battle was naturally the fortress guarded by Raphael, where more than half of the 500 defenders were killed, and the remaining half were all wounded. The section of the wall that the Giant Legion attacked was almost destroyed, and without the protection of the magic formation, a supreme warrior like John would have been able to collapse a large part of it with one kick. Defending the fortress and fighting in formation, the retreating legion suffered more than 900 casualties among the 3,000 soldiers of the retreating legion, a staggering number. George was also unable to counterattack for the time being, and the retreating legion was in urgent need of rest. But the people of the city received an unprecedented encouragement, because the legion they had formed had repelled the Giant Legion, and everyone regarded it as a great victory. In the minds of the people, this was also a victory for Ammonius, and everyone walked into the shrine at the same time to offer sacrifices to Murin and Ammonius on the high platform. Then the people heard Ammonius' oracle that the gods encouraged the people to have the confidence to build and defend their homes, and Salem was in an uproar. Ammon, far away in the Garden of Eden, learned about what happened in Salem through the statues in the shrine. The principles of the battle against Enrol had long been established, and Ammon did not want to intervene in the battle unless George made some mistakes in his command. George naturally did not make any mistakes, and Ammon was a veteran of the battlefield, and in his view, it was Felix who made a mistake. Felix should not have attacked the fortress so fiercely, and a smarter approach would have been to besiege it for a long time to strike and deplete the reinforcements of Salem, which the giant legion could have done. But Felix underestimated the defensive capabilities of the fortress and blindly attacked, and in the end he was in a difficult position. On the other hand, Felix had no choice. He wanted a quick victory to solve the supply problem of Enrol in the plains of Duk, and was unwilling to confront Salem for a long time. But the battle with George resulted in such a result. Now that the armies of both cities were resting, no one was able to launch a decisive blow. In the subsequent battles, as long as the commanders did not make serious mistakes, neither side would be able to defeat the other, regardless of victory or defeat. Unless there was a turning point in the balance of power, the situation had already been formed, and the complete annihilation of the other side had become an impossible plan that outweighed the gains. Amon did not have to pay too much attention to the battle. But Amon had to pay attention to it. When the people prayed to his statue with one heart, it formed a strange power that awakened Amon from the spiritual world, as if the statue standing on the altar had opened its eyes. Amon finally understood one thing. Building a shrine to accept the sacrifices of the people so that the soul could absorb endless power was not without restrictions. When everyone focused their faith on summoning him, his soul would also be disturbed, and he would even have to watch it all. For the first time, Amon was forced by the faith of the believers to open his eyes on the altar, and his training in the Garden of Eden was temporarily disturbed. He had absorbed this power, and it was only natural that he should pay the price of being coerced by this power at this time. In this case, Amon simply took advantage of the situation and gave an oracle to encourage the people. The celebration in the city was just a small interlude, and then Amon continued to train in the Garden of Eden. The war on the plains of Duk broke out as he expected, and several small-scale conflicts broke out, but neither side could achieve a decisive victory, and entered a state of stalemate and attrition. With this war, Amon's vision and mentality of the world gradually gained a sense of detachment. He was really like a god that people could not see, but could feel. Chapter 217. There were countless pieces of debris falling from the sky. Amon stood there with his sword stuck in the ground. Gabriel knelt on one knee in front of him and raised the battle axe high above his head with both hands, saying, "Amon, you win." Amon took the battle axe and put it away in his spatial magic tool. He stood there and asked, "George, do you want to arbitrate?" George didn't see clearly how the two had decided the winner, but the scene in front of him had already explained the result. He hurriedly stood up and said, "There is no need to arbitrate, Lord Gabriel has already admitted defeat." Amon pulled out his sword and gently patted Gabriel's shoulder. He smiled and said, "Well, the duel is over. You can get up." Gabriel said, "You can kill me." Amon replied without batting an eyelid, "I can kill you or not. According to the agreement of the duel, it should be up to me to decide. You are now my prisoner, and I will ask the Empire of Igut to pay a ransom for you, a noble warrior. If the Empire of Igut refuses, you will become my slave, and I have the right to give you back your freedom." Gabriel nodded and said, "That's right, what do you plan to do?" Amon smiled and said, "This is the first time in my life that I have fought with someone in such a way. It's really enjoyable. I'm tired after fighting for so long. Let's have a good drink and eat. I will send a messenger to the pharaoh about the ransom. You can only wait for the result. Your mission is complete. I still want to have a good talk with George." George came up and said, "Two top warriors of the continent, the duel just now was really wonderful. Unfortunately, I didn't get to see it clearly. Lord Gabriel, when did you become an 8th rank warrior? Even I didn't know." Gabriel stood up and replied, "Just now." George was taken aback. He stared blankly for a moment before exclaiming, "Advance in battle? I've never heard of such a situation." Amon smiled and patted him on the shoulder. "So what if you haven't heard of it? Haven't you seen it with your own eyes? I didn't expect that this duel would only last for a day. Let's continue drinking, we haven't finished talking yet." Everyone returned to the undamaged tent. It was time for dinner. Link cleaned up the broken utensils on the table. Aman took out all kinds of delicacies and invited everyone to sit down and talk. George and Link sat down, but Gabriel stood beside them. Link asked, "Why don't you sit down? Aren't you tired?" Gabriel replied with a serious expression, "My current status is Aman's prisoner of war. Aman is sitting at this table, so I should be standing. Thank you, Aman, for freeing me, and thank you for the food in front of me." The Supreme Warrior's temper was stubborn and he did everything very seriously. Aman had to say, "Then you can stand and eat. Drink a few more glasses of wine, I specially prepared it for the two lords." "George, the Supreme Warrior Gabriel has completed his mission, and you are also here to kill me. What do you want to do? Do you also want to ask me for a duel?" George shook his head and said, "I'm not a supreme mage like Celia. How can I fight a supreme general like you without a summoned beast? If I really want to fight, it should be the Supreme Warrior Gabriel in front, and I fight from behind. That is the best way to deal with you. The Egyptian Empire sent the two of us to kill you because they wanted us to do that." "Aman, but you didn't. How do you want to complete the task?" George sat in a chair and stretched his arms, his expression seeming very relaxed. "I accepted the order, but there are two kinds of tasks in this world, those that can be completed and those that can't be completed. Before I set off, I said that if I couldn't complete the task, I would not go back. I have long known your ability, and your power is far greater than when you led thousands of troops. It seems that I have to practice hard, otherwise I won't be able to complete the task. Ammonius, for the sake of our old friend, can you let me stay here and practice?" Aman and George looked at each other, and then both laughed, the laughter getting louder and louder, almost to the point of tears. Aman raised the jug and poured a glass of wine for George. "You are no match for me, you can't complete the task. George, I can continue to practice and become stronger, maybe one day I can surpass you now." Aman blinked and said, "You may improve, but don't forget that I will continue to practice too. I was far inferior to you at the beginning, and now I have a 9th level achievement." "George, then I'm afraid I'll have to stay here. Will you take care of my food, drink, and accommodation?" Before Aman could answer, Link couldn't help but interject. "Lord George, if you are willing to stay in Salem, we would be more than happy. I will arrange everything, you can rest assured and live comfortably, just let me know if you have any requests." George suddenly let out a long sigh and said, "Continuing to break through is easier said than done. There are many people in the world who have awakened their power, but almost half of them die as first-level mages, and some are even unable to break through to the second level in their lives. There are so many warriors in the world, but how many of them can achieve a higher level? After Enkidu, I have not heard of anyone else who has a 9th-level warrior, and now there is Aman. How difficult or lucky is it for a supreme mage to advance? I wonder if I can have that kind of luck." Aman smiled and comforted him. "Everything depends on one's own effort. Just like a mission, there are those who can't and those who can. You were not born to be a supreme mage, were you? Lord George, there is also a shrine in Salem, and now a chief priest is needed to appease the people. If you stay in the city, you would be the most suitable candidate. I wonder if you would be willing?" George glanced at Aman. "You yourself are the most suitable, right?" Aman shook his head and said, "I'm not suitable, I'm already standing on the altar." George nodded. "Well then, I can't live and eat for free, I have to do something. Before I complete the mission, I will be the chief high priest of Salem. It's a familiar job for me anyway, it's easy to do." Gabriel was surprised. "Lord George, you want to be the chief high priest of Salem? But their shrine." George turned his head and interrupted her. "Great warrior Gabriel, you still don't know where I came from, do you? I was born as a sorcerer, and as a sorcerer, I achieved the highest level. The person who taught me was called Nietzsche. He was born as a miner in Duk, and he was also a supreme sorcerer. Now that Duk has become the city of Salem, and I came here, it may be the luck that guided me to a higher realm. Aman, if you want me to be the chief priest of Salem, there are two things I want to make clear." Aman held his glass and said, "Speak." George said unhurriedly, "Since I am the chief priest of Salem, then don't use the title of mage, just call me a sorcerer, what do you think?" In the city of Salem, not only the nobles, but everyone can receive guidance in learning magic. No, let's just call it magic. Amon and Link looked at each other and slapped the table. Of course we didn't ask. In fact, we are all born as sorcerers. But whether it's magic or magic, it can't be taught casually, it has a test requirement, and can only be guided to the right person. It has nothing to do with identity. George smiled and said, "Of course I know this, I am the chief priest. These specific matters are handled by the priests. I will tell you what to do. I also want to remind you of one thing. My mission is still to hunt you down, and maybe one day I will do it." Amon also smiled and said, "I'll wait." George waved his hand. "You don't have to be too nervous, I will tell you before I do it. Anyway, the Order of the Empire of Igut did not specify the time, maybe 10 years, maybe 20 years, if I live long enough, maybe 100 years. Amon raised his glass and said, "Then I wish you a long and healthy life." The two clinked their glasses and drank, and as soon as Gabriel saw this scene, he already knew that George did not intend to return to the Temple of Isis as a high priest. He chose to stay in Salem as the chief priest, on the one hand, because he did not want to carry out the mission of hunting down Amon, and on the other hand, he should have his own considerations. A supreme mage like him no longer pursued wealth, status, or even glory, but achievements in this life, and may have encountered a bottleneck that he could not break through in his training, and was looking for a new opportunity. Gabriel was pondering there when Amon suddenly turned around and handed over a cowhide envelope. "Want to know what Maria said to me? It's about you, see for yourself." Gabriel took the envelope and took out the papyrus inside, only to see that it read, "Gabriel had to accept the order of the Empire to hunt you down. I know her temper, she will only fight you, so that it does not violate her beliefs. She has lost her power now, just like you did back then. This is a test. I hope you can help and guide her through the test, but everything is up to her own choice, and I wish her and you well. Amon, I have always known what you are doing, and I understand your love and your pursuit." Gabriel held the papyrus for a long time and read the simple lines of words over and over again, his fingers trembling slightly. After a long time, he looked up and said, "I didn't mention it to anyone, so the adoratress saw through it and knew that I had lost my power. No wonder she asked me to give this letter to you before the fight." Amon sighed. "You never read this letter at all, although it has always been with you. How incredible it is for a warrior to hand a letter to his opponent before a duel, telling the opponent that he has lost his power. Maria may have been afraid that I would accidentally hurt you, so I asked you if you wanted to change the time and place, but you still insisted on the duel today." Gabriel replied, "Even if I did not lose my power, I knew that I was no match for you, and I knew the result when I asked for the duel. During the duel, I forgot what kind of power I used to have, and I just did what I could. No matter how strong you are, you will advance unconsciously during the battle." Amon asked with great interest, "I have a personal question. For a 7th level supreme warrior like you, when you advance to the 8th level, do you usually lose your power?" Gabriel replied, "Some do, some don't, the situation varies. It is said that this is a test of the gods for their people, giving some more difficulties." Amon, "What's the difference between knowing and not knowing?" Gabriel, "In terms of the power mastered, there doesn't seem to be much difference, but there should be a difference, I'm not too sure about this." Amon turned to George and asked, "When you advanced to the 8th level, did you also lose your power?" George shook his head. "No, it's just that for a while, I always felt that I did not have enough magic power to perform magic, so I lived in seclusion in the shrine until I had enough magic power to instantaneously cast supreme magic. As far as I know, 8th level supreme mages have different experiences and achievements. For example, Julian, the supreme mage who died in battle, did not lose his power at all when he advanced. There must be some kind of clear guidance that I don't understand yet." Amon thought for a moment and asked, 9th level supreme mages like Likueyu, Gilgamesh, and Goliath, did they also lose their power when they advanced from the 7th level to the 8th level? George shook his head. "How would I know? No one will say it. Listening to you, you seem to understand the mystery behind it?" Amon smiled and with a flick of his finger, the wine in the jug gushed out strangely and condensed into the shape of a mountain on the table, from which several paths appeared, each leading to different heights. He explained, like climbing a mountain, there are many paths that can reach the same height. Some paths can go further, some paths may bypass certain obstacles but not reach the top of the mountain. There may only be one path or several paths that can eventually reach the top. George's eyes lit up, and he pointed to the hill of wine on the table and said, "The same path, different people can climb different heights. Some people can only stop at the foot of the mountain, others may reach the mountainside. Ammonius, if there is a chance, I would like to have a good talk with you in private." Link chuckled and said, "Lord George, you finally called Ammonius by his name? It doesn't sound like a joke this time. If you want to stay in Salem as the chief priest, there will certainly be plenty of opportunities." After he finished speaking, he glanced at Gabriel again, and seeing that she was still holding Maria's letter and standing there in a daze, he asked Ammon again, "Ammonius, Lord Gabriel is now your prisoner of war. How much ransom are you going to ask the Empire of Iga to pay?" Ammon also glanced at Gabriel, and then replied lightly, "I don't want ransom, I just want something from the Empire of Igut." George asked, "What is it? The Supreme General must want something special. It's not someone, is it?" This sentence was actually a joke, and the someone he was referring to was, of course, Maria. The Egyptian Empire could not agree to this condition, and Ammon could not make such a request. With another flick of his finger, Ammon put the wine on the table back into the flask and said expressionlessly, "If you want to ransom the supreme warrior Gabriel, my condition is the position of the chief god of the Empire of Inare." George's hand trembled, and he almost dropped the glass and said in a trembling voice, "My God, what kind of condition is that?" Ammon replied coldly, "The reform of Merneptah Pharaoh's divine system, the establishment of Inare as the only heavenly god, and Seth as the head of the angels representing the heavenly gods, has nothing to do with me. But he sent Gabriel and you to kill me in the name of the oracle, so my request is to deprive the oracle of its name. This condition may be unimaginable, but for this matter, it is only natural for me to make such a request. As for whether I agree or not, that is a matter for the Empire of Igut itself, and it has nothing to do with me." The hidden meaning of these words could only be understood by the gods. In the name of believing in Inare as the only heavenly god, Seth occupied the position of the chief god of the Ennead and guided Merneptah Pharaoh to carry out a religious reform, but sent down an oracle to let the Empire of Igut send people to hunt down Ammon and prevent his people from returning to the plains of Duk. Now Ammon's condition was that if they wanted to ransom Ammon, they would have to exchange it with the position of the chief god believed in by the Empire of Igut. This was simply beyond the imagination of the world, and perhaps even the craziest madman would not be able to say such a thing. But calmly analyzing the causes and effects, the conditions proposed by Ammon, while inconceivable, were not unreasonable. It was impossible for the Empire of Igut to agree to such a condition in order to ransom a supreme warrior, and even saying it would be blasphemy, and Ammon did not want them to agree, he just wanted them to propose it. George and Link recovered from their shock and looked quietly at Gabriel again, thinking to themselves that this supreme warrior would probably never be able to return. The shock on Gabriel's face was indescribable, as if he had heard the most impossible language in the world. Night had fallen, and there were no lights in the valley, and Gabriel stood in the darkness and finally spoke. "Ammon, you made such a condition to make it impossible for the Empire of Igut to ransom me. So what do you plan to do with me, as your slave or free me?" Ammon asked in return, "You don't have to ask these questions for now. I will make a decision when the Empire of Igut officially rejects my request. Now I just want to ask you one question. It must seem crazy to others for me to make such a condition, but you know the process of this matter. Does it make sense?" Gabriel pondered for a long time and finally nodded. "It makes sense, but it is also your own idea." Ammon smiled. "It is indeed just my own idea, and Merneptah can't stop me from thinking what I am thinking. If he is unhappy, then so be it, even if he flies into a rage in the palace." "Gabriel, Maria entrusted you to give me a letter. Didn't she give you an explanation?" "Gabriel, the adoratress also gave me a letter, and specifically told me to open it only after the fight. I haven't had time to read it yet, so I don't know what it says. Aman waved his hand. Then read it. If you don't want to say it, I won't ask. Gabriel took out another cowhide envelope from his arms, opened it, and pulled out a piece of straw paper. In the dim light of the night, he saw that it read, "You have lost your power, I know that, and I have told Aman. I know your personality very well, and only by formally dueling with Aman according to aristocratic etiquette can you be freed from your mission. Even if you have lost your power, you will still make this request. Otherwise, you will not pass the test, and only when you make a choice will you receive true guidance. Now that you have seen this letter, perhaps you have passed the test and will face another choice. Aman will make a ransom request that the Empire of Igut simply cannot accept, and you will become his prisoner of war, and after the Empire of Igut formally rejects it, he will release you and return your freedom. At that time, what kind of guidance will you receive in your faith? I know your faith very well, and there is no need to deliberately change it. I also know your faith in the gods, which is the light in your heart. I hope that you will find the true source of divinity and accept the guidance of that light. Finally, I also want to ask you a favor. If one day Aman is sad and heartbroken, please protect him, as you once protected me." Gabriel looked at the letter, stood there thoughtfully without saying a word, and finally quietly put the letter away. Aman and the others did not disturb her, and Link said, "Things here are done for the time being. Are we going back to Salem? I intend to hold a ceremony for the shrine to summon the gods, and now that there is a chief priest, I can ask Lord George to preside over it." Aman, "Summon the gods? I am also on that altar, and I will go to Salem myself, so it doesn't matter if I come or not. But Murin has been waiting for this day, and after I walked out of Igut, she has not shown up to see me, so she should be waiting to see when I will fulfill my promise?" Link winked and said, "The goddess hasn't seen you all this time? Don't you miss her a lot? Then this matter needs to be done quickly." Aman shook his head. "There's no need to be too anxious. This is also a celebration of the city. Let's wait here for a few more days and wait for Elmar and John to arrive before we set off together. You might be surprised." They waited in the fortress that was being built for half a month, and Link didn't quite understand why Aman said he would be surprised. When John and Raphael walked out of the charcoal marsh half a month later, Link did not recognize Elmar at first, and only saw an enchanting girl beside Raphael wearing a robe that clearly did not fit, the attire of the Hittite kingdom's priests, and should be Raphael's clothes. Link looked left and right and could not help but ask John, "Where's Elmar? Where did that big guy go? And who is this beautiful girl?" John smiled a little strangely, but did not answer. The girl twisted her waist and said, "I am an emissary of Ammonius, known as the guardian goddess of the charcoal marsh. Link, you can call me the goddess of the marsh, or the angel of Elmar." This girl actually called herself Elmar, and Link was dumbfounded and petrified. Aman's voice came from somewhere, "Elmar, congratulations. Raphael, thank you too. Have you found Bright Moon Knight's whereabouts?" Elmar bowed and replied, "We have been searching for traces along the way, but unfortunately we did not find him, and we were afraid of delaying your business, so we came out as soon as possible." Aman's voice continued, "It's good that you came out safely. He may have left the charcoal marsh, and since he was ordered to assassinate me, let me deal with him. Guardian goddess of the charcoal marsh, who gave you this nickname?" Elmar laughed and said, "It's Raphael. He even praised me for being untainted by the mud." Raphael hurriedly explained, "Aman, I was just joking with Elmarch." Aman's voice chuckled, "That's a good joke, Elmarch. Since you call yourself that today, then you must protect the safety of the charcoal marsh's trade routes in the future. Let's return to Salem together first. There's a celebration to be held. It's already the end of the month. Please support. Please. Thank you very much." Gabriel knelt on one knee in front of him, holding the battle axe high over his head with both hands and saying, "Aman, you win." Aman took the battle axe and put it away in his spatial artifact, then stood there and asked, "George, do you want to arbitrate?" George had not seen clearly how the two had decided the winner, but the scene in front of him had already explained the result, and he hurriedly stood up and said loudly, "There's no need for arbitrate. Lord Gabriel has admitted defeat. Amon pulled out his sword, patted the blade lightly on Gabriel's shoulder, and said with a smile, "Well, the duel is over, you may get up." Gabriel said, "You can kill me." Amon replied calmly, "I can kill you or not. According to the agreement of the duel, it should be up to me to decide. You are now my prisoner of war, and I will ask the Empire of Igut to pay a ransom for you, a noble warrior. If the Empire of Igut refuses, you will become my slave, and I have the right to give you back your freedom." Gabriel nodded and said, "It's like this, what do you plan to do?" Amon smiled. "This is the first time in my life that I've fought with someone in such a way. It's really enjoyable. I'm tired after fighting for so long, let's have a good drink and eat something. I will send a messenger to the pharaoh about the ransom, you can only wait for the result. Your mission has been completed, I still want to have a good talk with George." George had already come forward and said, "Two top warriors of the continent, the duel just now was really wonderful, but unfortunately I didn't get to see it clearly. Lord Gabriel, when did you become a warrior of the 8th rank? Even I didn't know." Gabriel stood up and replied, "Just now." George was taken aback, and after staring blankly for a while, he exclaimed, "Advance in battle? I've never heard of such a situation." Amon smiled and patted his shoulder. "So what if you haven't heard of it? Now you've seen it with your own eyes, haven't you? I didn't expect this duel to only last for a day." "Let's continue drinking, we haven't finished talking yet." Everyone returned to the intact tent, looking at the time, it was time for dinner. Link cleaned up the broken utensils on the table, and Amon took out a variety of delicious food, inviting everyone to sit down and talk. George and Link both sat down, but Gabriel stood next to them. Link asked, "Why don't you sit down, aren't you tired?" Gabriel replied with a serious face, "My current identity is Amon's prisoner of war. Amon is sitting at this table, I should stand. Thank you, Amon, for freeing me, and thank you for the food in front of me." The Supreme Warrior's temper was stubborn enough, and he did everything very seriously. Amon had to say, "Then you can stand and eat, drink a few more glasses of wine, I specially prepared it for the two lords." "George, the Supreme Warrior Gabriel has completed his mission, and you are also the one who came to kill me. What do you want to do? Do you also want to ask me for a duel?" George shook his head and said, "I'm not a supreme mage like Celia. How can I fight a supreme general like you without a summoned beast? If I really want to fight, it should be the Supreme Warrior Gabriel in front, and I fight in the back. That is the best way to deal with you. The Egyptian Empire sent the two of us to kill you, just because they want us to do so." "Amon, but you didn't. How do you want to complete the task?" George sat in a chair and stretched his arms, his expression seeming very relaxed. "I accepted the order, but there are two kinds of tasks in this world, those that can be completed and those that can't be completed. Before I set out, I said that if I can't complete the task, I will not go back. I have long known your ability, and your power is far greater than when you led thousands of troops. It seems that I have to practice hard, otherwise I won't be able to complete the task. Ammonius, for the sake of an old friend, can you let me stay here and practice?" Amon and George looked at each other, and then both laughed, the laughter getting louder and louder, almost to the point of tears. Amon raised the jug and poured a glass of wine for George, saying, "You are no match for me, you can't complete the task." "George, I can continue to practice and become stronger, maybe one day I will surpass you now." Amon blinked and said, "You may improve, but don't forget that I will continue to practice too. I was far inferior to you at the beginning, and now I have a 9th level achievement." "George, then I'm afraid I'll have to stay here. Will you take care of my food, drink, and accommodation?" Before Amon could answer, Link couldn't help but interject. "Lord George, if you are willing to stay in Salem, we would be more than happy. I will arrange everything, you can rest assured and live comfortably, just let me know if you have any requests." George suddenly let out a long sigh and said, "Continuing to break through is easier said than done." There are many people in the world who have awakened their power, but almost half of them die as first-level mages, unable to break through to the second level in their lives. There are so many warriors in the world, but how many of them can achieve a higher level? After Enkidu, I have not heard of anyone else who has achieved the 9th level, and now there is Amon. How difficult or lucky is it for a supreme mage to advance? I wonder if I can have that kind of luck. Amon smiled and comforted him. Everything depends on one's own effort. Just like a mission, there are those who can't and those who can. You were not born to be a supreme mage, were you? Lord George, there is also a shrine in Salem, and now a chief priest is needed to appease the people. If you stay in the city, you would be the most suitable candidate. I wonder if you would be willing? George glanced at Amon. You yourself are the most suitable, right? Amon shook his head and said, I'm not suitable, I'm already standing on the altar. George nodded. Well, I can't live and eat for free, I have to do something. Before I complete the mission, I will be the chief high priest of Salem. It's a familiar job for me anyway, it's easy to do. Gabriel said in surprise, Lord George, you want to be the chief high priest of Salem? But their shrine. George turned his head and interrupted her. Great warrior Gabriel, you still don't know where I came from, do you? I was born as a sorcerer, and as a sorcerer, I achieved the highest level. The person who taught me was called Nietzsche. He was born as a miner in Duk, and he was also a supreme sorcerer. Now that Duk has become the city of Salem, and I came here, it may be the luck that guided me to a higher realm. Amon, if you want me to be the chief priest of Salem, there are 2 things I want to make clear. Amon held his glass and said, Go ahead. George said unhurriedly, Since I am the chief priest of Salem, then don't use the title of mage, just call me sorcerer, what do you think? In the city of Salem, not only the nobles, but everyone can receive guidance in learning magic. No, let's just call it magic. Amon and Link looked at each other and slapped the table. Of course we didn't ask, in fact, we are all born as sorcerers. But whether it's magic or magic, it can't be taught casually, it has a test requirement, and can only be guided to the right person, it has nothing to do with identity. George smiled and said, Of course I know this, I am the chief priest, these specific matters are handled by the priests, I will tell you what to do. I also want to remind you of one thing, my mission is still to hunt you down, and maybe one day I will do it. Amon also smiled and said, I'll wait. George waved his hand. You don't have to be too nervous, I will tell you before I do it. Anyway, the Order of the Empire of Igut did not specify the time, maybe 10 years, maybe 20 years, if I live long enough, maybe 100 years. Amon raised his glass and said, Then I wish you a long and healthy life. The 2 clinked their glasses and drank, and as soon as Gabriel saw this scene, he already knew that George did not intend to return to the temple of Isis as a high priest. He chose to stay in Salem as the chief priest, on the one hand, because he did not want to carry out the mission of hunting down Amon, and on the other hand, he should have his own considerations. A supreme mage like him no longer pursued wealth, status, or even glory, but achievements in this life, and may have encountered a bottleneck that he could not break through in his training, and was looking for a new opportunity. Gabriel was pondering there when Amon suddenly turned around and handed over a cowhide envelope. Want to know what Maria said to me? It's about you, see for yourself. Gabriel took the envelope and took out the papyrus inside, only to see that it read, Gabriel had to accept the order of the Empire to hunt you down. I know her temper, she will only fight you, so that it does not violate her beliefs. She has lost her power now, just like you did back then. This is a test. I hope you can help and guide her through the test, but everything is up to her own choice, and I wish her and you well. Amon, I have always known what you are doing, and I understand your love and your pursuit. Gabriel held the papyrus for a long time and read the simple lines of words over and over again, his fingers trembling slightly. After a long time, he looked up and said, I didn't mention it to anyone, so the adoratress saw through it and knew that I had lost my power. No wonder she asked me to give this letter to you before the fight. Amon sighed. You never read this letter at all, although it has always been with you. How incredible it is for a warrior to hand a letter to his opponent before a duel, telling the opponent that he has lost his power. Maria may have been afraid that I would accidentally hurt you, so I asked you if you wanted to change the time and place, but you still insisted on the duel today. Gabriel replied, Even if I did not lose my power, I knew that I was no match for you, and I knew the result when I asked for the duel. During the duel, I forgot what kind of power I once had, and just did what I could. No matter how strong you are, you will advance unconsciously during the battle. Aman asked with great interest, I have a personal question. For a 7th level supreme warrior like you, when you advance to the 8th level, do you usually lose your power? Gabriel replied, some do, some don't, the situation varies. It is said that this is a test of the gods for their people, and some people are given more difficulties. Aman, what's the difference between knowing and not knowing? Gabriel, in terms of the power mastered, there doesn't seem to be much difference, but there should be a difference, I'm not too sure about this. Aman turned to George and asked, when you advanced to the 8th level, did you also lose your power? George shook his head. No, it's just that for a period of time, I always felt that I did not have enough magic power to perform magic, so I lived in seclusion in the shrine until I had enough magic power to instantaneously cast supreme magic. As far as I know, 8th level supreme mages have different experiences and achievements. For example, Supreme Mage Julian, who died in battle, did not lose his power at all when he advanced. There must be some kind of clear guidance that I don't understand yet. Aman thought for a moment and asked, 9th level supreme mages like Li Kuei-yu, Gilgamesh, and Goliath, did they also lose their power when they advanced from the 7th level to the 8th level? George shook his head. How would I know? No one will say it. Listening to you, you seem to understand the mystery behind it? Aman smiled, and with a flick of his finger, the wine in the jug gushed out strangely and condensed into the shape of a mountain on the table, from which several paths appeared, each leading to different heights. He explained, like climbing a mountain, there are many paths that can reach the same height. Some paths can go further, some paths may bypass certain obstacles but not reach the top of the mountain. There may only be one path or several paths that can eventually reach the top. George's eyes lit up, and he pointed to the hill of wine on the table and said, the same path, different people can climb different heights. Some people can only stop at the foot of the mountain, others may reach the mountainside. Ammonius, if there is a chance, I would like to have a good talk with you in private. Link chuckled and said, Lord George, you finally called Ammonius by his name? It doesn't sound like a joke this time. If you want to stay in Salem as the chief priest, there will certainly be plenty of opportunities. After he finished speaking, he glanced at Gabriel again, and seeing that she was still holding Maria's letter and standing there in a daze, he asked Aman again, Ammonius, Lord Gabriel is now your prisoner of war. How much ransom are you going to ask the Empire of Iga to pay? Aman also glanced at Gabriel, and then replied lightly, I don't want ransom, I just want something from the Empire of Iga. George asked, what is it? The Supreme General must want something special, it's not someone, is it? This sentence was actually a joke, and the someone he was referring to was, of course, Maria. The Egyptian Empire could not agree to this condition, and Aman could not make such a request. With another flick of his finger, Aman put the wine on the table back into the flask and said expressionlessly, if you want to ransom the Supreme Warrior Gabriel, my condition is the position of the chief god of the Empire of Inare. George's hand trembled, and he almost dropped the glass and said in a trembling voice, my God, what kind of condition is that? Aman replied coldly, the reform of Merneptah Pharaoh's divine system, the establishment of Inare as the only heavenly god, and Seth as the head of the angels representing the heavenly gods, has nothing to do with me. But he sent Gabriel and you to kill me in the name of the oracle, so my request is to deprive the oracle of its name. This condition may be unimaginable, but for this matter, it is only natural for me to make such a request. As for whether I agree or not, that is also a matter for the Empire of Iga itself, and it has nothing to do with me. The hidden meaning of these words could only be understood by the gods. In the name of believing in Inare as the only heavenly god, Seth occupied the position of the chief god of the Ennead and guided Merneptah Pharaoh to carry out a religious reform, but sent down an oracle to let the Empire of Iga send people to hunt down Aman and prevent his people from returning to the plains of Duk. Now Aman's condition was that if they wanted to ransom Aman, they would have to exchange it with the position of the chief god believed in by the Empire of Iga. This was simply beyond the imagination of the world. and perhaps even the craziest madman would not be able to say such a thing. But calmly analyzing the causes and effects, the conditions proposed by Aman, while inconceivable, were not unreasonable. It was impossible for the Empire of Igut to agree to such a condition in order to ransom a supreme warrior, and even saying it would be blasphemy, and Aman did not want them to agree, he just wanted them to propose it. George and Link recovered from their shock and looked quietly at Gabriel again, thinking to themselves that this supreme warrior would probably never be able to return. The shock on Gabriel's face was indescribable, as if he had heard the most impossible language in the world. Night had fallen, and there were no lights in the valley, and Gabriel stood in the darkness and finally spoke. Aman, you made such a condition to make it impossible for the Empire of Igut to ransom me. So what do you plan to do with me, as your slave, or free me? Aman asked in return, you don't have to ask these questions for now. I will make a decision when the Empire of Igut officially rejects my request. Now I just want to ask you one question. It must seem crazy to others for me to make such a condition, but you know the process of this matter. Does it make sense? Gabriel pondered for a long time and finally nodded. It makes sense, but it is also your own idea. Aman smiled. It is indeed just my own idea, and Merneptah can't stop me from thinking what I am thinking. If he is unhappy, then so be it, even if he flies into a rage in the palace. Gabriel, Maria entrusted you to give me a letter. Did she not tell you anything? Gabriel, the adoratress also gave me a letter, and specifically told me to open it only after the deed is done. I haven't had time to read it yet, so I don't know what it says. Aman waved his hand. Then read it. If you don't want to say it, I won't ask. Gabriel took out another cowhide envelope from his arms, opened it, and pulled out a piece of straw paper. In the dim light of the night, he read the words on it. You have lost your power, I know that, and I have also told Aman. I know your personality very well, and only a formal duel with Aman according to aristocratic etiquette can free you from your mission. Even if you have lost your power, you will still make this request. Otherwise, you will not pass the test, and only when you make a choice will you receive true guidance. Now that you have seen this letter, perhaps you have passed the test and will face another choice. Aman will make a ransom request that the Empire of Igut simply cannot accept, and you will become his prisoner of war, and after the Empire of Igut formally rejects it, he will release you and return your freedom. At that time, what kind of guidance will you receive in your faith? I know your faith very well, and there is no need to deliberately change it. I also know your faith in the gods, which is the light in your heart. I hope that you will find the true source of divinity and accept the guidance of that light. Finally, I also want to ask you a favor. If one day Aman is sad and heartbroken, please protect him, as you once protected me. Gabriel looked at the letter, stood there thoughtfully without saying a word, and finally quietly put the letter away. Aman and the others did not disturb her, and Link said, Things here are done for the time being. Are we going back to Salem? I intend to hold a ceremony for the shrine to summon the gods, and now that there is a chief priest, I can ask Lord George to preside over it. Aman, summon the gods? I am also on that altar, and I will go to Salem myself, so it doesn't matter if I come or not. But Murin has been waiting for this day, and after I walked out of Igut, she has not shown up to see me, so she should be waiting to see when I will fulfill my promise? Link winked and said, The goddess hasn't seen you all this time? Don't you miss her a lot? Then this matter needs to be done quickly. Aman shook his head. There's no need to be too anxious. This is also a celebration of the city. Let's wait here for a few more days and wait for Elmar and John to arrive before we set off together. You might be surprised. They waited in the fortress that was being built for half a month, and Link didn't quite understand why Aman said he would be surprised. When John and Raphael walked out of the charcoal marsh half a month later, Link did not recognize Elmar at first, and only saw an enchanting girl beside Raphael wearing a robe that clearly did not fit, the attire of the Hittite kingdom's priests, and should be Raphael's clothes. Link looked left and right and could not help but ask John, Where's Elmar? Where did that big guy go? And who is this beautiful girl? John smiled a little strangely, but did not answer. The girl twisted her waist and said, I am an emissary of Ammonius, known as the guardian goddess of the charcoal marsh. Link, you can call me the goddess of the marsh, or the angel of Elmar. This girl actually called herself Elmar, and Link was dumbfounded and petrified. Amon's voice came from somewhere. Elmar, congratulations. Raphael, thank you too. Have you found Bright Moon Knight's whereabouts? Elmar bowed and replied, we have been searching for traces along the way, but unfortunately we did not find him, and we were afraid of delaying your business, so we came out as soon as possible. Amon's voice continued, it's good that you came out safely. He may have left the charcoal marsh, and since he was ordered to assassinate me, let me deal with him. Guardian goddess of the charcoal marsh, who gave you this nickname? Elmar laughed and said, it's Raphael. He even praised me for being untainted by the mud. Raphael hurriedly explained, Amon, I was just joking with Elmarch. Amon's voice chuckled. That's a good joke, Elmarch. Since you call yourself that today, then you must protect the safety of the charcoal marsh's trade routes in the future. Let's return to Salem together first. There's a celebration to be held. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.